conference, and this date will always be historic, and that's because it's the only insight conference into LGBTQ plus people, our culture, our experiences. Quite simply, there's no other platform like this one, and it's thanks to YouGov's generous sponsorship as our principal sponsors that we're able to make it happen. So thank you very much to them. I won't speak for long in these opening remarks. I just wanted to share with you actually this quote. Let me get it up. This quote, as it's been on my mind a lot over the last few weeks, it reads, for those of you who, you'd be forgiven for not being able to read it, it says, "Speak the truth, even if your voice shakes." It was said by this person, Maggie Kuhn, who was a member of a very interesting movement called the Grey Panthers. They were all about advancing the labour rights of elderly workers. I think previously older people in the US had been forced to retire at the age of 60 or so, and she campaigned to let older people work further past that age. I like the quote a lot. Speaking up is not always easy. In fact, it's often super hard. When I first started speaking up and using my voice to try and highlight minoritized experiences and perspectives, I would struggle terribly with my nerves and my voice would invariably shake. I'd also have lots of other nervous symptoms, general shaking, a dry mouth, and also, and I don't think I'll ever shake this one, lots of sweating. But despite all of that anatomical drama, I'm so glad that I persisted, as it's gotten a bit easier each time I've done so. I like this quote because I interpret it literally, as I've just been talking about, in relation to wobbly vocal cords, but also figuratively, as for me, it evokes the kind of general nerves and emotion that you can feel when speaking up for something important that you care about deeply. So it could be just as easily applied to presenting at this conference, or publishing a post online sharing a point of view, or designing and delivering a research project intended to provide greater understanding and representation of minoritized communities. Whatever the format, if you feel that impulse to raise your voice, please follow it. As we know, there's so many crises and communities that desperately require it and that urgently need solidarity and representation. Today, we'll hear from lots of different voices, some of them seasoned and very experienced, while for others, it'll be their first time presenting in a forum like this. To all of you contributors and to the audience, I'd like to highlight that this is a safe, friendly, and inclusive space. In fact, the space has been engineered and designed to be and feel that way, a stage raised and practical for clearer sight of the speaker, but not very high and imposing. Comfortable seats, hopefully, warm colours all around you and soft lighting. Above all, though, it's the people assembled here who are called by one common interest and commitment to better understand the lived experiences of LGBTQ plus people today. That is what makes this a safe, supportive, and inclusive space. So, if your voice shakes, try not to worry, as we're all right behind you. Final points then, we've got a wellbeing area that some of you may have visited already. You're super welcome to retreat to it whenever you should like. It's just around the corner. Yeah, we've tried hard to create a mixed agenda with elements of light and shade. Some of the content is inevitably tough. And so please don't be all British and feel stapled to your seat if you're feeling a bit triggered, emotional, uncomfortable, or if you just want some more caffeine or water, if you need the loo. I really want to normalize standing up and leaving the space, or whenever you want to do that. Some thanks before we get started. Really want to thank Louisa Wedderburn, our MRS Pride lead at MRS, for doing such a great job of driving this event forward. Lou, your attitude and dedication are so inspiring. And thank you also to the wider MRS team who are with us today, and Nikki at reception. I don't know if the team are able to hear us, but thank you so much to them. Special thanks also to our MRS CEO, Jane Frost, for being here and showing up. as she always does, to support inclusion and to keep it right at the top of our industry's strategic priorities, as she always has done. Thanks also to our MRS Pride Steering Group members and our co-conveners and hosts for today, Chloe Fowler from The Nest and Jane Rowe from YouGov, who will be hosting the morning and afternoon's content respectively. Thank you for all of the time, thought and care that you've invested into creating today's agenda. Thanks also to the Winder MRS Pride Steering Group for all the work that they do to make our network thrive. Thanks to our team here at the Bailey, the eponymous Bailey, or Young Bailey, as we call him, as opposed to Old Bailey across the road. Bailey, thank you, our AV pro. Thank you to James for producing the event. And finally, thank you to all of you for showing up and being a part of the day. I'm just going to make sure that I've read some other really important bits, which I'll race through. There's no fire alarm scheduled, so if the alarm goes off, please do evacuate the building. Morning and afternoon refreshments will be at the back of the room. Lunch will be served where you picked up your badge this morning. So later on, the food will be over there. Toilets are at the back of the space. The programme can be accessed by scanning your QR code on your badges. Today's being filmed, contingent on the thumbs up from each of our contributors, and we'll share the recording with you over the coming weeks should you wish to share it with any of your contacts or indeed rewatch it yourselves. We're hosting a networking reception at the end of the day upstairs, and so hopefully you can join that. There'll be some nice 0% non-alcoholic options for those of you who, like me, are not drinking at the moment. We hope you'll ask lots of questions for our speakers today. So please, as you go through the content, don't be shy to raise your hand and ask questions of them. And I think I haven't forgotten anything, Lou, have I? I think we're good to go. So I'm super happy and excited to hand over now to Chloe, who will give our opening keynote contributor the introduction that she deserves. Chloe, over to you. Thank you.
Morning. Right, I'm just going to set my timer on so I don't start the day getting the black mark against my name. I know, but I can't trust just a clock. Right. One of the things I've always loved about the MRS Pride summits and events is that we always invite somebody to come along who is not of our industry. So we've had poets, performance artists, we had the fabulous drag queens at the party in the summer. And we thought today it would be fantastic to again start with a reflection on culture and our world more generally, but outside of specifically inside. So I wanted to invite my friend Lily to come along and talk to us. I met Lily a couple of years ago because she very kindly edited the second of my unpublished queer novels, and has in fact written 2 of her own, which are excellent. And if we get questions, which I hope we will, I would love to give you a copy of her books so that you can go away and read them and spread the word. But I really wanted Lily here today because I think that her books have a very specific take on our world and the world, and I thought it would be really interesting to hear her perspective. But I'm not going to do the job of introducing her because I think it's really cringy to sit there and have somebody talk about you and all the work you've done. So Lily, I'm going to hand over to you to introduce yourself, and then we will have a conversation and then open to questions.
Brilliant. Thank you. Hi everyone. Can you, yeah, oh, I'm being waved at. Turn it on. That would be a good idea, wouldn't it? And I do that by going on.
Yeah.
Like that.
You are now
gorgeous. Okay, gosh, I've really passed the first test. So yeah, hi, I'm Lily. Thank you, Chloe, for generous introduction of me there. So yeah, I'm an editor and a writer, and my sort of editing career began when I used to work at Penguin Random House, and I was a classics editor there. And I ended up, the things I'm sort of most proud of in that part of my life are I edited the love letters between Virginia Woolf and Vita Sackville-West. And I was also the editor on the first trans author on a classics list. So I'm really proud of that. So anyone who wants to talk to me about classics, please find me later. And yeah, then I also in quite a different vibe, started writing my own novels, which are very fun gay rom-coms, basically. So I'm going to wave them at you so that we can have some context for what we talk about later. So my first novel was Double Booked, which is the bisexual rom-com of your wildest dreams. Thank you, Diva Magazine. So yeah, in Double Booked, Georgina is a piano teacher who is in a very happy long-term relationship with a man, and she then one night goes and sees this cult lesbian pop band called Phase and falls in love with the drummer. And she ends up living a double life as sort of straight Gina by day and gay George by night, playing in these two different bands. It's about internalized biphobia and also some fun things. And then this book, My Own Worst Enemy, came out this year. So proud of it. And it's an enemies to lovers rom-com about two rival actresses. So our protagonist, Emmy, will do anything to kind of be the next like big lesbian actress, but her sort of plans for world takeover are foiled when in an audition room she meets May, who is the same casting type as her, and so they will always be kind of fighting for the very few roles available to short-haired lesbians. Yeah, this book, so this book I wrote over lockdown when I was depressed, and this book I wrote last year when I was going through a breakup and depressed. So I think that what is, yeah, maybe we'll sort of start talking about, but I think what is funny to me about these is that I kind of wrote them in order to kind of cheer myself up, and also to, yeah, hopefully in that process cheer up other people a bit. So yeah.
Which I think leads us on nicely to the thought around publishing, huge industry, but clearly you have identified a space for yourself and your work.
Mm-hmm.
And I wondered if you were conscious of that at the time that you were writing, or you've become conscious of it since. But tell me a little bit about the space in the industry that you've been able to carve out. Largely just you. There are only a couple of other writers who do the same thing as you.
Yeah, it would be nice to have more. It's, you know, not a competition. So if anyone wants to write fun gay rom-coms, please do. But yeah, I think I was aware, I was basically coming out myself and wanting to do the homework. I wanted to like read the queer canon and feel like I was, you know, I had a big chip on my shoulder basically about having not read enough kind of queer fiction. And I think I just found that all of the sapphic in particular representation was so sad and so serious, and I think it just made me feel, oh my god, is kind of being a lesbian really depressing? And it didn't feel that way to me because I was, you know, having my first deeply formative crushes and, you know, trying to work out what the hell was going on with that. And I think I just wanted to find books that were uplifting, that kind of represented people that felt relatable and understandable to me and my friends. I wanted to have that sense of reading the reason that people turn to rom-coms, you know, is because romance and comedy are the two best things in the world, in my opinion. And I wanted to be able to put myself into that main character position when I was reading those rom-coms. I also felt like bisexuality in particular, the ways in which that kind of, I think, is one of the ways in which kind of the bisexual label, I guess, experiences the world is that it tends to be kind of more invisible. And I think that it was important to me to kind of have characters that were named as such and that kind of went on that particular journey. So yes, I wanted to write happy gays, I suppose, and particularly bisexuals in Double Booked, and then the minority group of short-haired lesbians in My Own Worst Enemy, mainly just because I think that they're really hot, so I kind of wanted to write that.
Yeah, and I think we'll talk a little bit about how when you're writing novels about a group of people who you relate to, how you then pick which tropes to keep, which are, you know, you might leave out, etc. But I think one of the things that I loved about it, and you touched on that just then, is this idea of queer joy. And I'm sure I'm not the only person in the room obsessed by Heartstopper, but I think it feels as though in a space where a lot of TV, theatre, music can feel very from a place of trauma and sadness, which is absolutely part of all collective experience. Actually, queer joy is incredibly refreshing and exciting to read, and it's one of the things that I loved about your books. So I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about why you think now might be a time that there's a real space for that.
Yeah. And I mean, thank you, Michael, for sort of bringing up that sense of the light and shade that I think is human experience, right? And I think that for me, that sense of just wanting to slightly redress an imbalance that in, I think, our day to day, I feel like some of the most joyous people that I know are queer, because I think we have this amazing ability to find ways to be happy and support each other and find delight in the world. For me, being queer is the greatest gift, and I'm so happy to be gay. And I just think that I wanted to kind of translate that and help other people to understand why I feel that way. And because I think it's so sad that we don't all get to feel like that. And that's how I feel I can show up to my queer community, is by trying to, bring a little bit of light to people's otherwise blue news stories. And what's the point of going through all of the struggles that we have to face if we don't get to have a little taste of fun at the end of it? And so I suppose what I try and do is to create a space in which people can find that joy, whether or not they're experiencing that in their lived experience. It's escapism, basically. I could have said it's escapism.
That would have been a very short discussion on stage. Will you read us a little bit?
I would love to.
Set the scene and then read away.
I'm going to read from The Gay Actresses. So the kind of context here, I picked it for today. I did Google what market research is. I'm really sorry. So I don't want to be one of those like cringy people who kind of tries to speak to what your job is. But I'm hoping that, I suppose, what we're thinking about here in terms of trying to gain better understanding of people's lived experience. That's kind of what I do from the inside, right? Is like trying to understand fictional people's lived experience through kind of channeling my own. And I think that this is where I was thinking about this sense of actors having to create their own, having to kind of really inhabit their own label, right? Because as actors and creatives, you're kind of branded as your stereotype, and this sense that you will get a job if you look the most like a lesbian, right? So what this scene is Emmy and May are two kind of leading ladies who have met and immediately fancy each other, but are trying to hide it because they're rivals. They are now at a party, and they've been flirting, but accidentally. And at this point, Emmy, our main character, has just kind of suddenly realized that maybe this gorgeous, gorgeous person doesn't want to be talking to her anymore and is trying to kind of give her an out. So I bet May doesn't need to have her friends force her to go to parties to attempt to flirt with someone. I bet that May flirts with people effortlessly and successfully. But I'm suddenly aware of how long we've been talking. Surely she wants to talk to other people. She must be desperate to get away from her. I must not have been giving her the right cues. Shit. Well, I won't keep you, I say. Oh, she blinks at me. Okay. Well, maybe I'll see you round, right? On the audition circuit. Maybe we'll even get cast in the same thing. That seems unlikely, I say. May peels off the last bit of her beer label. Do you really think you're in that different a league to me? She says hesitantly. I frown. No, the opposite. She frowns back. What do you mean? How did I get a rival who doesn't even understand that she's a rival? I fold my arms. May, we won't get cast in the same thing because no shows need more than one person who looks like us. We'll be going for the same parts. We're in competition. There's room for more than one queer woman in showbiz, she laughs. I don't laugh back. Has she really been so sheltered up to this point that this comes as a surprise to her? How can she be whatever our type would be labelled, a mask woman, and not understand this stuff? Was her otherness not rammed down her throat at school, at work, and in the street? My chest hurts, but maybe her charm has saved her from all of that. Maybe if I wasn't so awkward, I'd be allowed to swan through things too. Well, okay, I say to her, but the statistical majority of queer female roles will be in the more traditionally femme casting type, right? They're more audience appealing and less threatening to the status quo of Hollywood beauty standards. There isn't room for many butches, not when we're only there as a novelty or a backpack for representation or an easy plot twist. So there's certainly not room for more than one white, slim, cis, non-disabled, short brown-haired, 25-year-old-ish butch to get their big break. But that's not fair, she mumbles. Yeah, well, okay, but in a very small pond, there's only room for one fish, I explain. Otherwise, the fish will starve, and then they'll eat each other. Saying it makes me realize just how devastating May's existence is to my career. Feeling shaky, I put my glass down. Maybe we should make some kind of agreement, I say. May eyes me suspiciously. What kind of agreement? Well, we don't want to be bumping into each other at every audition, do we? She picks at her beer label. Would that really be so bad? I look at her profile. Her button nose and neat chin, both clear upgrades on mine. I don't want to be the one to break it to her. She's only been acting for a few weeks. She still doesn't understand how dog-eat-dog it is. I, on the other hand, know that if she continues to audition for my parts, she will win and destroy my career. Plus, in the meantime, she'll distract me so much with her vibe, her dark magic, her ridiculous charisma, that my pre-audition routines will never be the same again. Well, yes, I say to her, I do think it would be awful. May's expression changes. Surprise turns quickly to disdain, then anger. The change is sudden but complete, like a flicked switch. She squares up to me. She's only centimeters taller than me, even in her big clumpy shoes, but exudes the energy of a giant. Her face is so close to me, it's even more clear in which ways our faces are similar and different. For one thing, she has offensively cute freckles. For a mad second, I want to touch them. She jabs at my collar. Fuck you, she says. If you want a competition, you've got a competition. Who are you to try and control my life? I finally accept it. It's my stupid destiny to be an actor, and now you think you can stop me? She laughs. Oh, you think it would be awful to see me auditions? Well, strap in for the nightmare of your life, Emmy Clooney. I'll be there. I'll be doing all of the self-tapes, all of the auditions, all of the callbacks. Wherever you are, I'll be there too. Suddenly, she presses herself close to me. Her proximity makes me breathe in sharply. She smells like the cologne I've been looking for all my life. Bright citrus. She whispers into my ear, but I'll be the one who makes it. I'll be the one on all the screens, all the billboards, all of the grand stages, and you'll be in the audience, clapping. Then she storms away, leaving me breathless in her lemon-scented air. Thank you.
And the good news is that's clearly at the beginning of the book, so there's a lot of drama to come.
There'll be snogging to happen later down the line.
So just we'll take questions in a minute, but I just wanted to ask you about what you had to think about when you were creating your cast of queer characters, because presumably there's a bit of a tussle between wanting to represent lots of different types, but also being true to a plot, a story, you know, wanting things to happen and feel real. So just talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, I am but one little gay in the world, and I wanted to write from my own experience, but I suppose the way that I've tried to balance that is to write about my own experience through my kind of main character. And then I want to feel that the other characters are representative of the kind of real community, which is not all just small little white things like me. So I, with that, wanted to make sure that I was, yeah, I mean, it's always going to be tricky because I think, as maybe we'll find in the talks later on, you don't want to feel that these things become this kind of tick boxing exercise of like, well, I need to have an LGBTQIA character in my novel, you know, and that ends up actually feeling less representative of the very community that you're trying to make feel seen. So I suppose what I kind of tended to do was to try to, I suppose, make it feel really believable as to why these characters were there. But I also think that what I love that I get to do with writing novels that are, you know, unabashedly kind of queer, and where, you know, I very deliberately tried to create plots where you would end up realistically meeting lots of different queer characters, right? So in Double Booked, there's this kind of cult of the queer pop band and the gay spaces that they inhabit. And in My Own Worst Enemy, they end up in this queer Shakespeare production where it's a full queer casting and they're all dressed as pirates, of course. So I think that what I enjoyed about that was the opportunity to not only have the one token gay character, which is what I think a lot of us are used to seeing in stories otherwise, is the kind of one gay best friend, right? And I loved that I get to have this opportunity to meet people that are therefore not just their label is the aim. So trying to have people who have weird eccentricities and quirks and personalities and likes and dislikes and flaws in the way that straight characters get to be a lot of the time. So yeah, I think it's I'm definitely not sort of claiming to be some kind of moral arbiter or perfect here, although I'm close. But I suppose it's sort of what I love is the opportunity to kind of get to at least have a few characters that I think speak to some of the amazing kind of queer people that I've met in those kind of spaces. And hopefully I'll just keep writing more, and that means that I can get to have more kind of rounded queer characters in that way. So
I wondered if there was a second reading I think you might, which I think speaks to what you've just been talking about. I thought we have time to do that, and then
Yes.
we've got a couple of minutes for questions.
Great.
So will you do your second reading and then for questions?
This is from Double Booked, and this is the moment where, spoiler alert, Georgina is bisexual, and I still say it with a weird. Anyway,
That's a whole nother panel
a whole
discussion.
story.
Yeah.
And this is the moment where she is at a gay bar with her best friend Sophie, and she has nearly just kissed another woman, and she's sort of having a bit of a spiral, and she's she's talking to Sophie in the smoking area. Sophie and I have always been there for each other through constant calls and nights on the sofa and pumpernickel favours, through her family rejecting her and that summer after finals when I quit the band. Sophie knows me better than I know myself, and she's been trying to help me realise something all this time, but I'd always refused to listen. The world sways around us, and I whisper into her shoulder, I think I'm not straight. The panic rises in my chest. I feel like I've exposed myself in public, but Soph just gently pats my hair. Yeah, welcome to the club, she whispers back. It's going to be okay. My stomach sags with relief. But now I've said it out loud, it does seem a bit less complicated and secret and awful, but the problem is, I continue, I'm not lesbian either. Soph chuckles. You know, there are other options. I pull back from her. Bisexuality? But I thought that was a bit of a... I don't want to say phase, but yeah, it's the word on my lips. Wow, scoffs Soph. Gather round, guys. Here's a unicorn telling me that unicorns don't exist. She takes a deep breath. I can tell she's about to go into Sophie educational mode. Bisexual people are the largest group within the LGBTQ+ community, but they're routinely erased. They get boxed into one side or another and stereotyped as like indecisive or confused. Oh God, I say, Soph, but I am indecisive and confused. If I said I was bi, everyone would just think I was letting the side down. Individuals shouldn't have to represent a whole community, she says. There must be another get-out clause, I'm thinking. If I really am this bisexual you speak of, I say, why haven't I fancied women before? Soph raises her eyebrows. Are you joking? You blush whenever a hot girl looks at you. I blush. Okay, but that could just be jealousy, right? What about all of your girl crushes, which you insisted were completely different from normal crushes? Yeah, okay, but... And remember in first year, before you got with Douglas, and I told you to come to that LGBTQ+ meetup because my friend couldn't? I'm outraged. You can't be talking about Amelia again, I say. You and Amelia were flirting harder than I have ever seen two people flirt in my life, says Sophie. I had to practically restrain you from U-hauling right then and there. Amelia didn't know I was gay, I say. She did not know that you weren't gay, says Soph. We were at a queer event and you were hitting on a lesbian. That is quite a gay thing to do. My gaydar is never wrong, she says, and you give off bi-fi signals. Why do you think we became friends in the first place? I fancied you. I pull the straw out of her mouth. You what? Sure, she says calmly, taking the straw back. I gawp at her. Wait, Sophie, you don't still... She throws her head back and laughs for longer than is strictly necessary for my ego. God, no, that was before I got to know you. Now I find you about as sexy as a slug. Shut up, I say. You shut up, I say. We punch each other. I guess I admit there may have been a few clues that I was somewhat repressing something. Baby, ever since you and Doug got together, you've done all that you possibly can to lock yourself up in that closet, like you do with all of the emotions that you feel ashamed about. But now the doors are off and Narnia is calling. Aslan and Mr. Tumnus want to meet you. But at the end of the day, I say, it doesn't matter if I mouth the word bisexual, because I have I mouth the word boyfriend. Soph guides me to a bench in the yard. Baby, everything is fine. There's no rush. You don't need to declare anything about yourself or do anything you don't want to do. I'm going to get us some water. Just stay here and don't snog anyone. I'm still smiling when I feel a tap on my shoulder. That was quick, I say, but it's not Sophie. It's Kit. She's the sexy one.
Yeah, she is. Fabulous.
Oh, thank you. Thanks.
We have got just less than 5 minutes, so I'd love to just get a couple of very quick questions for Lily, and anybody who asks a question who would like a copy of one of her books, please come and, or I will just come and thrust one at you. Anybody got a
Oh
question?
my God, imagine if you ask a question and then don't want a book. It would be so
Yeah, no,
embarrassing.
don't do that. Even if
Can you just
don't
take it
want the
anyway?
book, yeah, if you don't want the book, take the book and then, you know, do what you like with it. Right, who has a question? There's one in the back row there, Ben.
Hiya. Yeah, thanks for the readings. It was really, really interesting. Cool, thanks. So my question is, when you're kind of like creating one of your novels, how does the process work? What comes to you first, like the characters or the story? Like, what is created first?
Yeah, thank you. Lovely question. I think it tends to be this amazing thing of kind of multiple things happening at once, and then that moment where none of them would be an idea in and of itself, but when they finally kind of click together, that's where it becomes exciting. So for me, with My Own Worst Enemy, which is the one I wrote this year, it kind of came from the place of I knew that I wanted to write about the theatre because a lot of my friends are actors, and I found that kind of space a really fun thing to write about. I love like dramatic people, and I thought that would be fun. And it was combined with I was like dating for the first time. And my friends kept teasing me that I fancy people who look like me. And that just really tickled me. And I think for me, there was then this sense of suddenly, right, who's the worst person to have that condition, right, of fancying people who look like her? It would be an actor, because then you'd be rivals. And that kind of was when the moment kind of made sense for me, where I thought I would love to write an enemies to lovers rom-com because it's sexy.
Fabulous. Right, 2 very quick questions. Let's have one. There was one in the front row. Hello. Yeah.
Thank you.
Hello. What were the aspects of biphobia that you felt were most important to touch on? And was there a balance, if at all, about how to articulate that to queer audiences where they could see themselves in the characters, and also audiences where there's a bit of like learning happening there of someone who didn't have those experiences?
Yeah, great. Thank you. Amazing question, and something I thought about a lot through the process. So yeah, I definitely wanted it to feel accessible, whoever the reader was. And I think that meant a little bit of what is useful, I suppose, is because the main character, Georgina, is kind of going through that process of learning herself. It was useful to be able to have her kind of being like, I thought, a kind of everyman level of knowledge. So she's kind of, you know, and then her best friend is this kind of lesbian who knows all of the stuff, and so she can kind of mentor her through. As for that kind of which elements of biphobia I kind of wanted to touch on, I think for me a big part of it was internalized, and I wanted to kind of try to represent through a character what it feels like to have so much of that kind of internalized biphobia, which I think a lot of people have, whether they know it or not. And I suppose as a whole kind of I was going to say gimmick, and then I feel like that sounds critical of my book, but as a whole kind of setup, what I wanted, I suppose, in the sense of Georgina like living this double life, was this sense that I suppose my feeling was where if I was in a straight space, I mean, I look more gay now, but at the time I felt like if I was in a straight space, I was read as straight, and if I was in a gay space, I was read as gay. And there was just this sense of I wanted to show that in the kind of double life of Gina and George. So yeah, I suppose that sense of the invisibility, or yeah, the chameleoning. Thank you.
Fabulous. Now look, we're out of time, so I'm going to give you guys one of the books each, and then somebody else who would just like one, just come and ask me later on in the break. So we're going to get off the stage, and I'm going to hand over to Michael, who is going to introduce Opinion. But thank you, Lily.
Thank
Been great
you,
talking to you.
Thanks so much for having me.
Lily, thank you indeed. That was so
you.
amazing.
Mm.
Thank you. And thank you,
Thank
Chloe,
you.
for sharing that so wonderfully. And indeed for finding Lily as a contributor.
Oh yeah, let's.
Alrighty, so on to the next element in our program. So we now welcome Ellie and Jordan from Opinion. And actually, we've been in touch since I think the beginning of the year, haven't we, about this piece of research in one way or another. And I think you will all hopefully gain lots of interesting insights into the practicalities, realities, challenges of executing LGBTQ plus research. So please give them a very warm welcome.
Can you hear me okay? That's stunning. Well, hello everyone. It's really great to see, obviously, so many of us come together to pursue the better understanding of LGBTQ plus experiences. And as Michael mentioned, we wanted to take some time today to talk about some of the challenges that we faced in our experience of reaching out to these respondents. And we want to do this in a bit of a call for wider transparency and collaboration in producing reliable and responsible research among the LGBT community. So, as mentioned, I'm Jordan McLaren. I'm Senior Research Executive at Opinion, and I co-lead our Diversity and Inclusion Initiative.
Hi, I'm Ellie. I'm also a Senior Research Exec, and I'm a member of the D&I team at Opinion. So I guess the main theme that we'd like to talk you through is taking you through our journey from the conception of the big idea that we had about the research onto social context, the methods that we used, and then looking at the results and how we approached analyzing and distributing them.
But to begin with, why did we want to do a piece of research that focused on the experiences of LGBTQ plus people? Well, fortunately, where we work, we have the freedom to be able to pursue our own research interests and do that as part of our 9 to 5. So we had the scope to do so. And looking at existing research, we noticed some gaps and a bit of a short spell in LGBT focused research since the COVID-19 pandemic, with a bit of a slowness on new research being put out. And then we also noticed a trend in kind of conversations about LGBTQ plus people, but not always hearing from them in a reliable and replicable way.
So we obviously arrived at a great idea of having a state of the nation survey into LGBTQ plus people's experiences, attitudes, and lives. But this idea was very grand. We very soon realized that we had way too many ideas to feasibly research at the same time. So we needed to edit and to trim them down. But to realize what was the most important, most relevant, and in fact, what ideas we should stay away from, we decided to reach out and collaborate with some experts that Jordan's going to talk about later. So moving on to topics, we settled on 4 main pillars. So we started with self and experiences. And again, very fitting from Lily's talk, we really wanted to focus on queer joy. Did I go up? No, sorry. And how queer people experience being themselves. We then moved on to community and spaces, where we wanted to really look into access to queer spaces post-pandemic. We then moved on to work and education, within which we had a small part looking at Section 28, obviously very timely with the anniversary of the repeal coming up next month. And finally, we wanted to look at politics and public life, and whether queer people feel represented in politics, and indeed whether similar trust levels to general population in politics.
Lovely. And while we went into this research project, we went in kind of really blissfully with the idea of producing this great piece of research. And then slowly, as we started to get involved, the kind of anxiety and fear of the reality of the social context that we're producing research in started to kick in. And this notably being political and media hostility towards transgender people. And what our role as researchers is in providing evidence and making the intangible more tangible and what effects that could have. We really started to feel a kind of anxiety and worrying that what we put out into the world would be used to further fan the flames of hostility that is being faced. So we had to make sure that we recognise that there's a wider social context within the research and actually recognise our position as researchers within that, and take a do no harm approach in going through this project, and to also kind of veer away from shockingly newsworthy insights, to kind of strike a balance between something that is insightful, interesting, but removes itself from being inflammatory. Again, as mentioned by Ellie and by Lily, is that we want to see more of these positive experiences, more elements of joy in a time of doom and gloom for many of us. So the way that we went to go resolve that was, again, by reaching out. It was about meeting other experts within the industry for us to be able to go through and kind of check what it was that we wanted to research and what considerations we needed to make when it came to responsibly handling the data of this project. So we reached out to Stonewall, Transactional, Advertising, and our very own Marissa Pride, who were all incredibly helpful in guiding us, not just methodologically and on the topics that we wanted to talk about, but in also quelling our own anxieties and committing to producing research that incorporates trans people, but doing so responsibly. There we go, there's the build for it all. But our journey didn't stop just there in the design phase. We really needed to think forward as to what happens when you've got the data. Once you release that data and it goes into the public eye and anyone can access it, how do we put in some blocks to make sure that it is reported responsibly? Now, unfortunately, in the past, we have had experiences where research has been misrepresented. And in our Multicultural Britain series at Opinium, run by Priya Minhas, in many years ago, when sent out to publications and journalists, the data was misrepresented by a small portion of them. And this experience and knowledge of the PR process caused us a bit of, again, adding to this fear of what could our research potentially add to in the media landscape. So for us, it was about putting in a real clear PR strategy to make sure that we have checkpoints of consideration, to make sure that we align with the journalist, that we're comfortable with who's going to be reporting on the data. So that was, again, by having a briefing with our press agency, not only to talk to them about the research, but to give them a very detailed, or to give them an overview of the social context we're operating in, our worries around the media landscape and the political hostility going towards trans people. Again, we then moved on to sourcing exclusive journalists rather than distributing widely out. And this gives us a chance to be able to feel confident and trusting of whoever is going to take that data and produce media output. And again, consistent checkpoints throughout this to align on the process and make sure that findings are representative to what has been said. Now, it's also worth saying that we cannot control how data is interpreted, and we can't control what people write about it, and nor should we. There should be a freedom in being able to use that data. However, as researchers, where we pull from these experiences of people, we do have a responsibility to reduce harm where it can be done. And having these checkpoints of considerations is how we went to go about doing it.
So while we considered all of those social and cultural aspects, we also very soon got reality checked into what it actually takes to run our own research project. So technical issues like what do we base our targets on, what sample is available out there, how do we make the sample inclusive to all of the identities in the LGBTQ+ community, and finally, perhaps the realest of them all, how do we keep the costs down? So thinking about the targets to begin with, obviously as researchers we use the census day in, day out. It's the most reliable source of any targets for nationally representative studies. But for LGBTQ+ community, we do know that 7.5% of people did not answer the sexuality question, and 6% did not answer the gender identity question. And moreover, those two questions were only asked of people who are 16 and up, meaning that the ONS estimates about the LGBTQ+ community can be less accurate than we'd like them to be and are likely smaller than in reality. Census also is a household-based survey rather than an individual-based survey, which means that some people might have not answered those questions truthfully or as truthfully as they would have liked, because they just basically didn't want to out themselves to their families. On a more technical level, we also know that the Scotland data was not released at the time, which made the comparisons impossible. And further on, as the data is getting released now, we know that the gender identity question is not comparable to the England and Wales one, which again makes that comparison impossible. And finally, when looking at the ONS results, there's a bit of a disconnect when looking at the LGBTQ+ community between LGB and T. and other gender identities. So we needed to do quite a lot of work behind the scenes to join those two data sets up together to be able to achieve a whole holistic view of the community. At the same time, we realized that, and ONS also realized all of those drawbacks and sort of not advertise them, but acknowledge them themselves. So we do know that, but we also realize that this is the best we can get and best we can base our targets on. So moving on to our sampling journey, we know that quite a few suppliers that we reach out to, their answers were not as good as we had hoped. So the scope was really quite limited, very low numbers from some, and not being able to get us to the point of representations that we needed, both on gender identity, sexuality, age, gender, and all of those different demographics. But we also know that we're limited by those who are on the research panels to begin with. So targeting trans respondents in particular was really, really difficult. And again, looking at cost, inclusive sampling tends to be more expensive as it is, which can be not only a drawback to us, but also potentially to our clients who might want to host a study like this. So how we overcame those is, firstly, we shopped around a lot. We talked to many different suppliers and chose one who were able to get us most of our sample. And we used other smaller ones as top subs as needed. And then we actually cut down the sample below what was available to us to make sure that it was representative rather than the biggest we could get. And finally, we also partnered with one provider for a preferential cost per interview, just to try and keep those costs down.
Now, ultimately, when it came to our journey of doing research among LGBTQ plus people, we did feel that it was important, to have a moment where we share our learnings of the journey and not just the kind of success and the findings once we get to the output. A big part of our process for us was being able to lean on other LGBTQ plus or allied researchers or industry professionals to be able to get answers to different questions, how we're tackling these problems and how we're going through producing reliable research among our community. So what we want to do is obviously share these learnings, not just success and findings. Also, having a sensitive approach within your methodology is key, not just given the social context at the moment, but also due to the methodological difficulties of accurately estimating the population that we are talking about and also claim to represent. There's also work on that part, no offense to depending people in the room, on supplier panels and how we can have a better relationship at making harder to reach voices easily accessible and cost effective. And then lastly, a bit of an encouragement to really think about how the data lives on once you're done with the project. We can put in so much control and consideration in the design phase, but there is an element of just sending it out into the wind once we're done. But what can we do to at least have some moments to have a considered release that does not further flame the fans of segregation? And then lastly, while we've talked about a lot of the challenges, we did want to just end on at least a little bit of uplifting. So one of the questions that we did ask to people was a very simple, quick one around, what in being part of the LGBT community brings you happiness? And I think even a lot of what came out really exemplifies even our journey for the research. This focus on people, belonging, togetherness, and connection is something that is really unique to us and how we support each other. And that was fundamental to the research process. Being part of the LGBT community, it's not just about feeling accepted, it's about feeling accepted and not just tolerated. It's about that sense of progress that has been made. It's the feeling, the love that you feel when you find yourself in that accepting space and being able to be with like-minded people. Knowing that you're not alone and that others have gone through the same challenges that you're experiencing and have risen above them. And then one of my favorites from here is that how unique we are. And when you're forced to rediscover who you are, then I believe you become your most beautiful, colorful self. So this was us on our challenges, and we would love to hear from more of you and get together more frequently to establish how we produce this sort of research reliably and accurately. Thank you very much.
thank you both so much for those behind the scenes insights into your methodological journey so far. Thank you. So I've got a couple of questions for you. Other questions from the audience are super welcome as well. So please do put your hand up if you've got any questions for Ellie and Jordan. First question from me is, were there any kind of drawbacks to the kind of quite ambitious methodology that you put together? Were there any kind of setbacks or?
Yeah, I think obviously the drawback of once you start to collaborate with lots and lots of different people, it's obviously the realization that you're suddenly then spinning all of these plates. And while bringing people together to kind of tackle these issues is really good and helpful to solve them. But I think one thing I didn't necessarily expect was how much of myself I was going to feel attached into the research and into those connections, especially as an LGBTQ plus researcher or gay researcher. Just the part of self that started to kind of reflect while going through it, and dealing with the kind of fear of what was to come was something that really kind of added as a bit of a drawback. It's great to have these kind of warnings and forewarning, but it does then put a bit of a anxiousness in your mind, which thankfully by being able to reach out to others in the industry, it was able to kind of quell that over time.
It was interesting to see community come out in the word cloud as one of the most joyful, positive aspects of being in our community, which is exemplary of, I guess, what you just described, the mutual support for each other, and hopefully there's lots of that feeling here today. Any kind of sneaky interim headlines from the research that you can share with us, or?
I think my favorite, or what I found the most interesting, was the section 28 section. So looking at awareness in the LGBTQ plus community is quite high. About 2/3 are aware, which unsurprisingly increases as older the respondents got, as they were likely living through it. But among the younger groups, it's just about 1/3, which is in line with what broader population is, which I found really surprising and maybe a little bit concerning. But at the same time, we are obviously approaching the anniversary, and hopefully there will be some media attention around that, just to remind and educate people a little bit about the queer history.
Thank you, Ellie. Thank you.
I think one that I find quite interesting as someone focused on diversity and inclusion within the workplace, when we kind of looked at some of those findings, seeing that, the kind of use of pronouns within communications things didn't rank as highly as you really thought it would. There's a lot of media talk around the use of pronouns, which is obviously completely valid, and it's a great kind of way that we're going. But actually this kind of focus more on tangible protections or accommodations that are kind of baked into policies that actually accommodate LGBTQ plus people in the workplace kind of coming out a bit more. And it's this shift from the kind of the optics of inclusion to the kind of actual bones of how you put those safety nets in. So I think it's a real nice shift in the conversation of what we can then do next for people.
Really interesting point, Jordan. So almost pronouns are important, but they're almost a kind of red herring sometimes, or a kind of deflection of actually the really important things, which are about policy, genuine, inclusive and safe cultures in workplaces and that kind of thing.
Yeah, potentially. So I think there is an indication towards that. So, yeah.
Thank you both so much. So in the absence of any more questions, I'm going to, yeah, we've got a question. We've got a question here, please, Lou. Could we get the mic, please? Thank you. Apologies, I nearly wrapped up before you had the chance.
Hi, thanks for sharing all of that. Now, I don't work in marketing, so I don't know if this question is allowed, but do you know when you're going to be delivering findings?
So we have a series of releases that will be happening over the next couple of months. I feel like, if anything, feel free to email me and I can get a little mail list ready to go, so then we can keep people updated if that sounds better. But yeah, we have some in the works over the next coming months.
Yeah, so we obviously have the Section 20 release coming up beginning of November, and then in the next couple of months.
The Multicultural Britain series of studies has set a really high benchmark for research into multi-ethnic experiences in the UK, and so I think there's a good legacy and momentum for Opinium to go into our communities, and hopefully you'll do a very special, deeper presentation on the findings.
To Phil.
Well, agreed. Priya's an amazing researcher, so yeah, but hopefully we've agreed that MRS Pride exclusive for when the presentation comes on.
Lovely, of course.
Thank you both so much. A round of applause for Ellie and Jordan, please. Thank you. Alrighty, so we're taking a little break now. There is tea, coffee, and biscuits at the back of the space. Before we do, indulge me, if you will. I did something similar at the MRS Pride Party, summer party at the RVT. It's awkward, but it's important. So before we take a break, please, could you just turn to somebody that you've never spoken with before and introduce yourself very briefly? Please don't cheat and speak to someone that you know really well. And the intention is just to open up some new industry friendships and relationships and conversations for the day. So please, your name, where you work, and that will do for now. Over to you. Hello. About your lot, then. Been thinking about your.
All right. Feels like I'm doing that teacher thing where I just stand at the front until everyone quiets. Everyone, I hope you all got coffees, teas, etc., bathroom breaks. I'm really delighted to introduce our next session of the day, which is actually 4 quick fire sessions of 10 minutes each about getting it done and how to actually do that measurement of LGBTQ plus people in research and people who've actually managed to do it and how that's gone for them. So please hold your questions for the end of the 4 sessions. There'll be a combined Q&A for all kind of 4 groups. But to start, I'd like to welcome Sarah from Magenta and Charlotte from Legal & General. Take it away. I think I've got a green on. Can you hear me? Can you hear us?
And we've got a clicker. We're all professional.
How very exciting. Right, actually, I'll pop it.
There we are. Away you go.
Brilliant. So my name's Charlotte May. I head up research at Legal & General, and it's an absolute pleasure to be here speaking with everybody today. I think this is such a brilliant conference with such a great focus. So thank you for having us, I think, as a start point.
And my name's Sarah Jenkins, and I'm a director at Magenta, and we are a small research agency. We absolutely push and pride ourselves on inclusivity, both internally and externally. And we had the privilege of working on this project that we're going to share with you today, all about how to ask questions you know that people don't want you to ask. So here to tell you a little bit about how the project came about. Charlotte's going to give us that bit of a background, really.
Yeah, so I think it's worth really raising that this had started coming up internally, both from staff members and from customers, people wanting to use perhaps titles that weren't in the traditional list that I'm sure you're all very familiar with, and questioning what should we do around it, but also from a very specific context. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Legal in General, we do really exciting things like insurance, life insurance and pensions and investments. Woo, yeah. But we require gender identity, specifically sex at birth, for very specific reasons, because we use that as part of our underwriting, which again, if you're not familiar with underwriting, essentially if we're trying to find a life insurance product or we're trying to get you an annuity, which is a form of pension income when you're retired, we do that in a way that takes into consideration factors such as your medical history. And obviously gender at birth will dictate, for example, your propensity towards things like breast cancer versus testicular cancer. So we need that information, not purely just because we have a tick on a box and we want an M or an F or etc. So we needed to be able to get hold of that information, but we were very mindful that as society is becoming more progressive and things are changing, we wanted to think about how might we start positioning that slightly differently. So I was tasked with how might we do that, and I am not an expert whatsoever, and I was very clear about that. I was like, there's too many risks of us getting this wrong and running the risk of really offending people or actually getting the wrong outcomes and getting incorrect information. And incorrect information is really problematic for us because potentially it could mean that people get a poor outcome. And as a financial services business, the FCA are challenging us to make sure we do deliver really good outcomes for all of our customers. So it was too important for us not to get it right. So it's also worth thinking about the fact that, you know, we're a large scale business. I'm not going to lie, change is really complex in a business of our size. We're definitely a tanker rather than a speedboat. So if we were going to make any changes, we needed to make sure the changes we were making were pretty much right first time, and we understood those. It was also important to get some buy-in because we had some stakeholders who were like, we don't need to do this. I'm sure you've all come across those attitudes yourselves. Equally, at the other end of the scale, there were people who were absolutely brilliant advocates who were really, really keen for us to do this work. But either way, having clear evidence was going to be really important rather than just opinion and speculation, because I didn't certainly feel like I could give that guidance, and an awful lot of people internally felt the same. So it was really important that we got that view. So one of our questions was around what titles should we be thinking about? What should we be including? Would MUX be a sufficient addition to our list? Because the challenge is as soon as you start to look for other alternative titles, where do you start? Where do you stop? And if it's a drop-down menu, that could be very extensive. But also thinking about how do we best request that gender at birth, that sex at birth? What's the best way to go about doing that in a way that isn't going to offend any form of customer? And then finally, we wanted to learn from best practice as well, because we know there are some businesses out there who are already doing a really good job. So let's not reinvent the wheel. What's already working very well?
Great. So having been tasked with the research question of asking people what their sex assigned at birth was to people who don't necessarily want you to ask that question or answer it, we were sat there thinking, okay, how do we go about doing this? It would have been very easy for us to, you know, immediately it becomes obvious we want to do an individual interview. We want people to have a safe space. We want to have an individual conversation. We want to hear their experiences. And it would have been easy for us just to write a discussion guide that said, how do you feel about this question? How would you answer this question? Why? What difference does that make? You know, we could have asked those standard questions, but we had a very big suspicion that it was potentially a lot more complex than that, and that there was a lot more going on that we needed to be aware of. So even before we wrote the proposal and spoke to the team at L&G, we went and spoke to 3 people who were transgender, non-binary, about their experience. When do you get asked this question? How do you feel about it when you're being asked this question? How do you answer this question now, like in the things that you're doing, in the forms that you're filling, in the processes you're going through? And it confirmed our suspicion that it's very horrifying to some people to have to answer that question. And we also kind of realized that it does often get the wrong answer. And by the wrong answer, I mean people lie, and they don't lie maliciously. They give the answer of the gender that they genuinely believe that they are, which is the one that they are now, not necessarily the one that's being asked or is needed. So we kind of already knew we had to go about this in a very sensitive way. We couldn't just rush into it. And we therefore needed to go and do some expert interviews and try and learn a bit more. So very often when you do a project with a new group or a new product or whatever, you get to the end of that product, that report or that project, and you think, God, I learned loads about this particular group or this particular item or this category that I didn't know before. When doing this subject, we felt we couldn't wait to the end to learn what the issues were. We needed to know up front what we were dealing with. So we did do some expert interviews, and by doing these, we spoke to people from Stonewall, gendered identity, the All About Trans project at Heard. We spoke to a qualitative researcher who herself is a transgender woman, really just to try and get some understanding of the complexity and the history. So by doing these expert interviews, we understood, you know, this isn't about ticking a box and answering a question. You're asking them to give you the answer to something which their whole life, for some people, they've grappled with and not really felt they've been able to give a true response. Now, in some instances, if the question is worded correctly, and if the person is in a positive mental health headspace and feeling good, it's an opportunity to truly express themselves. But actually, the chances of those two things coming together on any one day are very slim. And so it really can be a difficult process and journey. So what we learned through doing the expert interviews was really an understanding of the reaction we were likely to get and why, and what the hesitations in answering would be. And so we really went into the interviews forearmed with, you know, understanding when we ask this question of participants, we understand why they may not be wanting to answer, or why there may be a hesitation, or why there may be an anger towards us asking this question. And it was only through doing that that we felt able to comfortably and confidently create that safe space for the participants and provide them with the reassurance that they would need to be able to take part in the interviews. Because there was a lot of conversations up front about how would we recruit these people. They're not going to want to answer the questions because they're always asked questions about this, and they never feel like they're given any, you know, there's never any change. It's just another tick box exercise. So we really were forewarned before we sort of went into the interviews about we almost kind of knew or hoped we knew what we were going to get before we got there, not with the answers to the questions, but in terms of the response from participants. So unfortunately, we can't give you the insight in terms of how do you ask that question. So what we thought we would do is a little bit of sharing, really just professionally and personally, what we've learned and developed as a result of doing this, and kind of that's the process we took. But Charlotte, what did you learn from it as a professional and personal doing this project?
Yeah, I mean, I think that professional and personal thing is really important. So first and foremost, I learned a huge amount personally about some of the nuances of the trans community. And, you know, I was really, really grateful and appreciative. Genuinely, when you use the word privilege, that's how I saw it. There's lots of research projects, I'm sure you all do, where you just, you know, you're doing the day job and, oh, is that quite interesting? Oh, and people think that's about insurance. But this, for me, felt like a really different project, because I genuinely felt like it gave me the opportunity to educate myself, which is not necessarily something you come across even in your career very often. So genuinely really privileged. I really felt that it was important that I could start to educate the business as well about how they were going to need to get their head around about how identity is fluid. Now, I'm sure most people in this audience are like, well, yeah, no shit. However, for our organisation, traditionally, you know, gender has been that binary, you fill it in, male or female, that's it. Whereas actually getting them to see it as just as titles can change. Somebody can get a doctorate, so we need to update their title. We need to be thinking along those lines, because for many individuals, it's not a done deal, and we need to make sure we're conscious and have our systems in place so people can modify that. So it seems like a simple thing, but actually helping the business learn and appreciate that was really, really important. Also, I think a big thing for us was banning the word other from any of our questions ever again, and not just actually around kind of a gender identity. It was around ethnicity, around basically anything. Like my team now, it is a banned, effectively swear word within our team, and we're not allowed to use it, because I think I'd probably always seen it in a question, but I'll be honest, I hadn't really fully appreciated how exclusive in that sense of the word it really is. So for me, that was such a small but important professional learning of whatever you do, just ban that word, remove it, take it out of the dictionary, whatever it would be. But that for our team has been such a small but important piece for our own work, as well as anything that we happen to be doing within our systems.
And then I sort of asked the team before I came, like, tell me about what you learned from under doing this project. And they said, it's a reminder that people have no obligation to share their personal life experiences with us, and it is our responsibility to create a safe space for them to do so. Somebody else said, it's a reminder of our privileged position as independent researchers that we get to hear these stories and we get to have these conversations, and it felt like a real privilege to have the opportunity to conduct the research. And somebody else in the team really compared it for herself. She said, I've always found it incredibly irritating that companies feel the right to know my marital status by having Miss or Mrs. And she's always used MS and even continues to do so even though she's married. I haven't come across MX before the research, and I think it's a great addition. As a cisgender woman, I'm limited by my title collection of marital status, but the sense of injustice and frankly ridiculousness that applies to gender collection. So the fact that there's a really minor thing for somebody that's about marital status and a major thing that we're talking about in relation to gender. So really, I think for us, it was an absolute privilege. So the two things I think I'd like us to wrap up and take away is, firstly, it's not always about waiting to the end of the project to find out what the issues are. Actually, sometimes being forewarned can be really powerful when you go into research. And then the second thing really is that this is absolutely not a end box, tick box, we've done this project, let's move on, let's carry on. It's a process, it's continually changing, and there will never be an end destination. So we will certainly continue to ask, and I know that L&G are continuing to ask and making sure that we're staying on this journey moving forward. That's it.
Thank you so much for that. And I think it's really true that everything is not just a process, it's an ongoing learning, but also those learnings, as you say, they start before the project. We'll have questions after all 4 sessions, but now I'd like to welcome Ella and Raphael from C-Space.
Hi, good afternoon, good morning. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to hear the case study so far, and thank you for giving us the chance to share a bit about our work. My name is Ella Mayaba. I'm a practice director at C-Space, heading up our innovation practice. We're inside an innovation agency, and with me today,
I'm Raphael. I'm a consultant at C-Space.
Just to share a bit of context before we kind of dive into our learnings, at C-Space, our philosophy that guides everything we do in our work is something we call relationship thinking, and it means 2 kinds of relationships. So how are the brands that we're working with creating better relationships with the people they serve? And how do we as researchers or strategists build better relationships with the people we include in our projects and studies? We do a lot of work in the space of health where this is so important. So we've been talking a lot with our clients about how do you actually look at the patients you're working with as kind of 360 human beings, and also how do you make that conversation more inclusive, because there's so many voices that haven't really been heard in the health conversation. And we started to get a lot of different briefs from clients in this space. Is a key category for us. And one term and topic that kept coming up was women's health. And we needed to kind of think about how do we broaden the conversations we have with our clients about this topic. So I'll hand over to Raphael to share a bit about the kind of considerations.
So as we all know, obviously, women's health has been historically ignored. It's historically been sidelined in research and unfortunately in market research as well. So women's pain, it has not always been taken seriously. Over half of women today still feel that their pain is not taken seriously by health practitioners. And the idea of women's health and the category of women's health has kind of been brought in the hopes of remediating that issue. Unfortunately, there has still an even bigger gap for trans, intersex and non-binary people when we're talking about health. You see here, I don't like the term women's health. It may make trans men unwilling to get their health checked if they think they're going to be treated as a woman and will face discrimination. today, over 25% of LGBT people feel that they're not understood by their healthcare practitioners. And an even more astonishing 70% of trans people avoid seeking out health advice for fear of transphobia. And it's in this tension that we are trying to explore today. And I'll pass on to Ella.
Having these kind of conversations and looking at this data really meant to us we need to start a different kind of conversation with our clients in the health sector, one that's driven by the belief that no person should be left behind when we're talking about something as important as health. So obviously for health, it's not just about the client's performance or profits or product launches. It's such a topic that can really impact your life experience. It's an outcome. It can make the difference between confidently seeking treatment or not. It can make the difference between being diagnosed correctly, your mental health, literally life and death questions. So we really need our clients and us, we have a responsibility to include everyone in this conversation and invite every person into this conversation. So that's how we kind of got started. So we brought together in US and UK, our DI think tank, our Queer Space ERG, and our health sector consultancy teams to think about how we could kind of develop a point of view, how we can have data and perspectives to start a different kind of conversation in our teams and with our clients. So what we did, we ran a qualitative conversation on our kind of ongoing Customer Now community. We did a survey about the health research experiences. So kind of what kind of experiences and pain points do people experience when they take part in research and are part of LGBTQIA community? What would they like that health research experience to be like in the future? And we also did some expert interviews with kind of leading edge health providers, as well as more traditional providers, the likes of folks across our US team. What did we discover?
We identified kind of 3 ways for researchers to make everyone feel included in health conversations, and hopefully we'll give you some tips that you can start implementing today to make kind of health conversations more inclusive for everyone, and obviously not just health, everything else. So the first way is to reimagine the research experience. So you can see here that in the survey we launched, 66% of respondents experience questions that make them feel like they're not applicable or relevant to them. This is an issue for us at researchers, and there are multiple ways you can try to remediate that, and rather we can try. So the first one, when we ask respondents, what would make you most comfortable? It was always giving them the option to have their own voice moderators. So if you're talking to someone about your health, it's easier to feel that you're heard, listened to, but also perhaps mirrored by the person and really understood by the person you're talking to. Another thing that was already mentioned today is practicing inclusive screener practices. So obviously open-end and never other. And why we recommend using an open-end way, so that you can let people tell you who they are. You can always follow their lead instead of kind of making assumptions. Another thing, don't forget about multi-choice. None of us are a single thing. And there's also multiple facets that can include, that can impact such categories like health, for example, gender and sexuality. Don't assume, just ask. And finally, don't forget about project and community fields and names. Language is not really the only way to exclude people. So think about the way when someone kind of looks at your survey or at your community for the first time, what might make them feel excluded. That's not just about the language. So to really create an inviting space, to make everyone be invited, everyone needs to feel invited.
Thank you. The second theme that came up was how do we kind of reimagine the roles and think about the consumers and their personal health experience? How do we kind of frame them as the experts in this process rather than traditional research participants? And actually, in our research, 45% of people in the LGBTQIA community felt that they had experienced researchers making assumptions in the process that they needed to correct, whether it was assumptions about their gender and being misgendered, or assumptions about the type of relationships, types of sexual relationships they might be having, and needing to actively kind of correct researchers in the process. And I think this powerful quote really says a lot. Researchers should avoid making assumptions. They don't know who you are. So if they don't, they want to talk to you about who or what you are, just ask. And this was one of the key learnings. We've made a lot more space to asking questions. So never making any assumptions, asking questions. How do you like to talk about this topic? What kind of words do you use when you're talking about this? And then I guess that's general best practice, but just really mirroring that language throughout. And if you're working with people for over longer term, what was really important to people was kind of coming back to that. So those preferences can change. So keep coming back to the conversation. And creating spaces to regularly interact with people throughout the process. We like to create, for example, longitudinal communities where we can get to know people and actually invite people in the research process right as the brief or conversation starts, and actually ask them, what do you think is important when we're researching this topic? How would we create a great experience for you when we're about to research this topic? And finally, how do we bring our clients along on the journey and take that language and that inclusive language that we use within our conversations to the kind of conversations that brands have with consumers? So how do we innovate new brand language? And actually thinking beyond research, as 60% of the LGBTQIA community members felt that in the kind of health communications they'd seen, they've experienced language or imagery that felt like it didn't really reflect their lived experience. So what we're asking, and I think this quote really beautifully puts it, nothing about us without us, include the people you're talking to in the drawing up of these things. And that's why the philosophy we take really is one of co-creation. How do we bring brands and consumers together to create new solutions? And similar to the point that Raphael made about the kind of community look and feel, how do you actually unpack that with your clients? There's a question of kind of the language and terminology they use, but quite often the visual language or semiotics can also be inclusive or exclusive. So really getting people to think about their brand experience holistically to make sure it invites everyone on the conversation. So those were three of our key learnings to take to clients. I want to thank you for your time and hope any of you working in health space have taken something useful for how to make the health conversation more inclusive to everyone. Thank you.
You just leave it there. Thank you so much. I so appreciate the fact that everyone's giving us learnings to take away. I love the endings of that. Now I'd like to introduce Sam and Olga from Channel 4 and Tapestry Research to talk about their work.
Hi everyone, I'm Sam from Channel 4 and this is Olga from Tapestry. And today we're going to talk you through everything that we've learned about the representation of the LGBTQIA+ community from carrying out our Mirror on the Industry project over the last 5 years. The project is Channel 4's major insight initiative that tracks the progress the ad industry is making when it comes to representation of minority and marginalised groups within TV ads. Firstly, I just want to give you a bit of a background on the study. So we started it in 2019. We really wanted to put the industry to the test, and we released our first wave of Mirror on the Industry. And we wanted it to act as a real temperature check to uncover whether what the industry was saying was really being reflected in what they were doing when it came to their TV campaigns. The first project created a really big impact. It shocked the industry into realising just how much more work needed to be done and provided an overdue numeric starting point. 2 years on after that, in 2021, we launched our second wave, and shortly after that, we committed to running our audit annually as part of the legacy of our Black to Front initiative. This presentation covers the results from our first 3 parts, with a sneak peek of the results from part 4, which will officially be launching before the end of the year. Our project really highlights just how important and top of mind issues concerning diversity and inclusion are for consumers. As you can see from the stats on this slide, events of recent years have audiences in hypervigilant mode when it comes to how we as an industry respond and adapt.
So now that Sam has told you why we do it, I'm going to tell you a little bit about how we do it. So this study takes a comprehensive 2-phase approach. First, we've got the full TV advertising audit process, where we ask a series of auditors to code the top 1,000 TV ads that run from March to September each year. And we ask them to code things up like which minority groups are appearing in these ads, what roles they're playing, how they're being portrayed, type of ad, how long they're on the screen for, and so many other things. The list is extensive. And in the phase 2, we've got the quantitative survey, which is an accessible nationally representative survey. And this year we asked 4,000 interviews. This large sample allowed us to really look into all the different minority groups and the intersectionalities that exist within them. And we've also run focus groups in the past that enabled us to add a real human touch to our insights. So obviously today's session is all about the LGBTQIA+ representation. And first, I'd like to talk you through the 3 kind of big things that we've discovered over the 4 waves that this research was being conducted. First of all, is that levels of representation of LGBTQIA+ people are unfortunately low, and they are remaining stagnant over the years. The second thing is that tokenism and stereotyping are still prominent when ads try to represent this group, and it is being noticed by the consumers. And finally, as mentioned, there is a lack of intersectionality and portrayal of diverse identities within the community, which basically means that only one set type of person is being portrayed in these adverts. And now let's take a look at the results a little bit more. So we asked the consumer how they think the representation is going. What do they feel about representation of LGBTQIA+ people? Is it too much? Is it too little? Is it the right amount? Or are they not sure? And as you can see, the LGBTQIA+ people are 2 times more likely to say that they're being represented too little in advertising. Even this sort of sentiment is even stronger among gay, lesbian, bisexual, and groups, and those who describe themselves as non-binary or self-describe. And this is also in consensus with the national representative view that finds these groups as being represented too little. So the question is, I guess, what is happening like in the audit? What is happening in the reality? Are consumers just not seeing the efforts done by the industry, or is representation still low? Let's take a look. So as you can see, unfortunately, the representation is stagnant and low. It has been at 3% of all ads. So LGBTQIA+ characters featuring only in 3% of ads in the 4 years that the study ran since 2018. They also feature in lead roles only in 2% of all ads. And this is a slight increase from previous years where it was 1%, but it's obviously still a very low number. Encouragingly, though, they are playing lead roles in the 95% of ads that they do feature in. But of course, this is obviously based on a really small amount of ads.
Thanks. So when we look at the profile of the LGBTQIA+ characters we coded in all of our audits so far, the results are really revealing. So firstly, we found that this group are predominantly represented by gay people, with none of the characters in ads being transgender in the most recent audit. These characters are also much more likely to be shown as younger, with just 17% of them being 50 plus in our recent audit stats. They were significantly more likely to be white than any other ethnic minority, and over twice as likely to be men. None of the LGBTQIA+ characters in the ads we audited had a disability. So in short, it's predominantly young, white, gay male representation we're seeing. Even though there's an expansive list of identities that make up the LGBTQIA+ community, the stories being told are very limited. The current diversity in ads needs to be diversified to account for the many stories and lived experiences from within the community. We also code for the type and tone of ads the community featured in as well. And the results are really interesting here as well. So in our most recent audit, LGBTQIA+ people were 1.5 times more likely to feature in ads that fulfilled the purpose of saying something about the brand, with 1/3 of the ads they featured in being brand building ads. Interestingly, they're also much less likely to appear in ads about a product or service, or to launch a new product. And those types of ads tend to be more business as usual, concentrating on selling. And the fact that brands revert to not being as diverse for these types of campaigns, it's just there's still very much the process of opting for one-off diversity ads, rather than going for comprehensive inclusion across the board. And this has actually been a really prevalent trend across each wave of our research. When it comes to the tone of ads LGBTQIA+ characters featured in, they're almost twice as likely to feature in playful ads. On the contrary, they're less likely to be portrayed in everyday ads. This trend raises concerns as it may inadvertently perpetuate stereotypes, portraying individuals as exclusively flamboyant or funny, instead of including them in ads that have a more everyday feel to it. Another major trend across all 4 of our studies was something we called the montage effect. So that's the heavy reliance on montage ads from representing the community. While straight characters are giving more linear stories, in our latest wave, we found that over half of ads featuring LGBTQIA+ people were montage ads, compared to just a quarter of overall ads. And the figures have been very similar in each of our previous waves as well. This prevalence of montage ads suggests a tendency for a tokenistic representation. So instead of developing a single narrative, it creates a mixed bag of characters, which can just add to the perception that they're just there to tick a box. Before we wrap up, I just want to touch on how we actually code the characters in our ads. It's clearly some of the groups in the study are more visibly identifiable than others. So we wanted to unpack what advertisers do to present LGBTQI+ characteristics in a way that's identifiable to audiences. So first is the use of famous people who have been open about their sexual or gender identity. This can be a really effective way of being inclusive, but not needing to make their sexual orientation or gender identity central to the narrative. It's a really common trend we've seen across the years, with LGBTQIA+ characters in ads over 3 times more likely to be a celebrity. The second approach is building someone's sexual orientation or gender identity into the script. So an example we've got here is this Nationwide ad where the lead character says, "I just want to treat my girlfriend and I to front row seats at a musical." This approach can be a really powerful way of incorporating inclusive stories. The final way, which relies much more on the assumptions we make about group characteristics, is reliant on stereotypes. This is a really complicated way to portray groups. And when we're talking about being diverse, inclusive and representative, stereotypes feel really counterproductive to our progression. Of course, we can't ignore that there are people that feel represented by stereotypes, and stereotypes are shortcuts, so it's quite an easy thing to do in ads. But we need to be cognizant of the impact of them and why it's important to challenge them rather than reinforce them. So before we wrap up, it's clear what brands need to do. They need to attempt to be more representative and inclusive across all comms. But actually doing so can feel like a really overwhelming task, especially given the fear a lot of people and brands have of getting it wrong. Therefore, when we put this together, we came up with these 6 key tips for improving representation and portrayal in order to really help agencies and brands that we take this to have some tangible steps they can take to make ads more inclusive. Don't have the time to go through them in detail today, but we're really happy to share them with you after the session if you'd like to know more.
And finally, just before we wrap up, we wanted to show you an example of an ad that performed really well in the consumer survey with both LGBTQIA+ people and those who don't identify as that, finding this ad a good example of representation. It felt likable, it felt relatable, and just you can see that it's kind of covering those aspects that we spoke about earlier. It's got a linear story that develops 2 characters. It has an everyday feel to it, and it also has an example of intersectionality. And yeah, so we are all eager to see good representation, but we just have to remember that it's not just about headcounts, it's about meaningful and authentic portrayals. And it can be really difficult to portray someone's sexuality in a mere 30-second ad without, relying on tokenism and stereotypes. But we do hope that today's session just helped to shed a little bit of light on the trends that exist in UK advertising. And we are around if you wanted to ask us any questions.
Thank you so much for that. And quite shocking to see the figures haven't changed. But I'd like to welcome Martin from MTM onto the stage to tell us a little bit about whether that's changed in video games.
Thank you very much. Is the mic working okay? All good. Awesome. I'm going to try and not hold up everyone's lunch too much. But I just wanted to take you through our recent study into diversity and representation in the world of video gaming. So a couple of things to note about the study. It was self-funded, which was awesome because I got to become my own client for once and not have anyone to answer. Not quite sure how the rest of the team probably felt, but it was fun for me. But it also meant there was no agenda. We had no clients' hypotheses to prove or disprove. we were just going to represent the LGBTQ plus audience in the gaming world. What do they want from content when it comes to video gaming? Now, just like everyone else, I'll just quickly go through the study. We did expert interviews at the start to make sure we did our due diligence. We did a bunch of desk research. We spoke to Adrienne Shaw, who is a professor in the States, the leading voice on LGBTQ plus representation in video games. She teaches about it. She started the LGBTQ plus Gamer Archive and was just quite frankly freaking awesome. We then took those ideas into a number of cold interviews, and that's where we started to get into the topic of intersectionality. So overlaying things like age, life stage, which is really important, as well as gender. And then we took that into our quant stage. Unlike some of the other people you've heard from, we don't actually have a big an issue in gaming in reaching the LGBTQ plus audience. We actually spoke to over 700 queer gamers. So then we could really deep dive into intersectionality. And that's what the rest of this is based on. Just before I start, is there any gamers in the audience? Ah, awesome, about a third. For anyone who's not that well connected in the gaming world, what's the issue? Well, it's very much the lack of content. So until around 10 years ago, there'd only been around 500 games with an LGBTQ plus character. We've made a little bit of progress in the last 8, 9, 10 years, and we're up to around 1750. But there's been around 800,000 video games. Probably should have done the maths. Probably some clever people in the room. That's a very, very, very tiny proportion of the games that are made. But, and this is why I said we find it easy to speak to LGBTQ plus characters, the video gaming industry is actually overrepresented when it comes to that audience. A fifth of the people who make video games identify as LGBTQ plus, and that's from a trades body survey that was run quite recently by Yuki. In terms of the people who play video games, there's various statistics, but the most robust and reliable is that one you can see there. Around 13% of the audience identify as LGBTQ plus. So actually, the audience is there, the numbers are there, the people making the games are there in the industry, but we haven't quite got to the point of the content being freely available yet. So what did our LGBTQ plus gamers tell us? Firstly, does it matter? I'm sure everyone in here would say, yes, of course it matters, but we needed a number to say it does matter. And you can see our LGBTQ plus audience, they're the second highest for saying that it's important that games include a diverse set of characters. And just behind non-cis, where there's obviously a relation anyway. But amongst all types of gamers, diversity does matter. Why does it matter? And this is where we get some of the real powerful emotive elements that if you're creating content, you can evoke by focusing on the LGBTQ plus audience. So it creates a more inclusive environment. It's awesome. It represents historically marginalized groups. And actually just represents the world today. The world is diverse. If you create different stories and different characters, you just represent what is out there at the moment. It also makes better games. It humanizes the characters. It makes them more relatable. You feel more immersed with that content. It does all the things you want to do if you're creating a video game. You're getting more people playing it and more engagement. And it also allows future generations to learn about DIA, something that we're also here to talk about today and advance. To put that into gamers' own words, so our LGBTQ plus gamers, again, you can just see how emotive this story is. Inclusive, it normalizes and humanizes people. This one is awesome. It allows people to explore inwards more outwardly. That's a really compelling argument that we are telling developers and publishers to make better content that is aimed at the LGBTQ plus audience. And it also helps you grow and appreciate. So it helps us become better people. It helps also bring other people who aren't as progressive along that journey with us. But where are we right now when it comes to video gaming content? Very much LGBTQ plus gamers do not feel represented by the content. And of course, that's because there's not as many games out there as we would want them to be. So only 19% feel represented by the characters in the games that they play. And only a third say it's got better over time. Now, we would want both of those numbers to be 100%. That is where we are aiming for, and we're planning to do this study and see how it moves over time. Just go on a couple of the insights that we found. one of the main things, so people laughing, obviously The Sims, which has been one of the best and most progressive representations in the gaming world. But one of the main things we found is that representation goes beyond seeing yourself represented. So actually the LGBTQ+ gaming audience, they just want to see something different. It doesn't have to be about an issue or story that they feel very personally connected to. It's about just seeing something new and different. So 3/4 want to see more underrepresented groups, irrespective of who they are. Again, from some of our quote interviews, we've got some of the most amazing quotes. It's not necessarily about seeing myself represented, although it's neat when that happens. Creativity shines when different combinations or expressions of different people are in games. Again, we've put these quotes in front of developers and publishers, and you can see their reaction straight away to see how emotive this issue is. What types of stories do gamers want to see? Now, as you would expect, dealing with sexuality is the main one, but there's a massive range of stories that you can use in any type of content to connect with the LGBTQ+ audience. Mental health, significant life events, disability, daily stresses, racism, and just general growing up. It doesn't have to be about sexuality or gender to appeal to this audience. Just a couple more slides. Again, something we were keen to tell developers and publishers and anyone who creates content, if you engage with the LGBTQ+ audience, you're going to have a hugely positive impact. So those people are going to play your game more. They're going to tell their friends and family about that game. They're going to play other games that you make. They're going to seek out other games in the series or other ones that you've released. They're going to recommend it, and they're also going to talk about it on social media. There's literally no reason not to do it, because the positives when you do it right are insanely positive. And then just 2 more slides. I know there's a few gamers in the audience. For anyone who's not in the gaming world, gaming gets a bad press at times, toxicity in gaming, but actually the community is sometimes one of the best communities for any types of fandom. 3/4 of our queer gamers said it has a positive impact on their mental health. And 62% say they've met people through gaming that they wouldn't in other walks of life. The fan communities that exist in this world are hugely positive, hugely diverse. And actually, when we did our call interviews, you hear some of those personal stories, sometimes quite heartbreaking, but the community that they had to rely on, engage on, was so positive, it's hard to ignore. So to finish up, if you're developing any type of content, we've done these studies at MTM for other entertainment products and services, and some of these do apply. Don't assume that it has to focus on sexuality and gender. You can make stories about mental health, about disability, about life events. Don't assume that the characters need to be the hero. Now, traditionally in video games, LGBTQ+ characters were the antagonist. That kind of changed about 15, 20 years ago, and they become the protagonist. And a lot of our gamers were saying, actually, I want to see a better balance. And to paraphrase, and this is very politely, what one of our trans gamers told us, she was saying, LGBTQ+ people can be arseholes too. We don't have to be the hero at all times. The positives, as we said, are huge. And just like the last presentation, it's all about it being natural and not forced. And that last point is really the main one. Take the time to get it right. LGBTQ+ gamers don't expect there to be a character who represents them in every game. They want different types of characters, but if you're going to do it, take the time, engage with the community, make sure people making the game represent that community, because doing it wrong is worse than doing it right. That's it.
Thank you very much. If you stay up there, take a seat, and if I could have the rest of the speakers up. We're now going to have a couple minutes of Q&A, so if I could get the other speakers to come up and sit on the stage, and there will be a roving mic for the audience to take questions from, and also a mic for the speakers. But just, I guess, to start, a question from me, while everyone sits down. Quite a few of you have talked about the challenges of getting a queer sample, LGBTQ+ sample. Martin, apparently not. And especially because of the fatigue or the lack of trust there is, because they're getting asked these questions, they see an opening survey with what is your sex and they're fatigued by it. Do you have any tips of how to make it a safe space for that recruitment to get people to participate? Just open up to whoever has a mic on them.
The things that was mentioned in our survey that actually ranked quite highly, it was third option out of 7, was actually knowing who the client was, if that's possible. So that's one option. It puts people in confidence knowing that their information is not just asked just because. And another example of that was timing the question right. So a lot of people feel a bit kind of rejected if you're screened out after asking a gender or sexuality question. So making sure that the survey is kind of put in an accessible way that doesn't feel like people are being judged or left out for their sexuality or their gender would be 2 ways.
Okay. Yeah. Any other recommendations from anyone?
I mean, just to say that the reason we found it quite easy.
If you use the mic, just, oh, you've got a lapel, it's fine. Sorry, if you don't use the mic, it doesn't come up on the recording, so carry on.
Just one recommendation we've seen in other work is we use like community pages, Facebook pages for the gaming work. We use Discord, Reddit as a way of sourcing respondents, and it's quite a good way. And it kind of snowballs as well. You get recommendations, and it adds up quite quickly.
Yeah, well, you've got that buy-in from being in the community already.
Yes,
it's great.
I think the other thing I'd probably add is just being really transparent about what you're going to do with the information they tell you. Like actually tell them why you want to do it and what you're going to do as a result with the information, so it doesn't feel like it just goes into a void and it's yet another pit of survey questions being asked, whatever. But actually saying we're going to use this to do X, Y, Z.
Yeah, knowing the client, knowing why it's being used, knowing you're embedded in the community, all kind of helping to build that trust. Are there any questions from the audience? Pop your hand up and Lou will bring you a mic.
Thank you. There was a bit of talk earlier on about there being the challenge of stakeholders who aren't already on board. I remember with legal in general that was an issue, and I remember listening to a talk from someone who's working on sustainability, and their approach to that was just terrifying, just doing whatever they could to absolutely terrify stakeholders and be like, look, the people are going to die and you need to make a change. I'm guessing that that's not the approach that works in this issue. I'm particularly interested in the other industries as well. What have you found has been successful for getting people on side and getting through to people and making the issue real to them?
How do we convince stakeholders that this is important to do?
Like all of the data and statistics are very helpful, but also just in general, building empathy, because it might be an issue or lived experience people haven't thought of or considered before. So I think that kind of storytelling and bringing people onto the journey and getting to really understand that different lived experience is key. And also just fostering curiosity, asking a lot of questions in your initial briefings and getting people to think about and kind of have that aha moment themselves as well of who's been left out of the conversation and what could we do differently.
I'm coming from the angle of us trying to persuade sort of brands and agencies and stuff to where it's worth sort of embracing D&I and ads, and we kind of approach it from like three benefits. So it's like there's commercial benefit because there's a lot of money to be made from appealing to different audiences. There's a creative benefit because tasking creative agencies to think about different people in ads actually like exercises the more accepting part of the brain and makes you more creative and that kind of thing. So there's actually some psychology behind it. And there's a link to that, there's a societal benefit as well, because if people are seeing more diverse content on the screens, then society is going to become a better place. So we've kind of put it the sort of emphasis so that we've actually got a really important thing to do. We can literally unite society. So trying to kind of appeal to their egos, I guess, and be like, you can really do, you've got the power to do this. Yeah.
Any other questions? Oh, Lily, over in the far corner. Sorry, Lou, you're going to have to do a little jog.
Thanks. This was super interesting. Thank you. I was wondering, when it comes to, I suppose, and sorry if this is a really dumb question, but I suppose I'm interested in, as someone who's, filled in my fair share of forms, and thinking about the ways in which, like, trans identities are thought about in this space. I suppose I'm wondering whether you've experienced any kind of difference in kind of trans women and trans men, and the ways in which like that, I suppose I'm wondering about whether trans people kind of then end up like inconveniently getting lumped together when actually there are obviously, yeah, within that quite a lot of quite clear differences in experience there. And how do you navigate that kind of thing?
And I'll just throw something out there about it was another agency that I've worked with previously, and we did some work into, if you're answering on a survey, transgender, male, female, whatever your options are, trans women identify as women. They don't pick transgender women always. It's not, so you can't just take the box of saying they've ticked transgender, therefore they are transgender. That would be, foolish to take that. So they are women and they see themselves as women, and they would tick woman as a box. And it was work that was done ahead of kind of developing the census questions. So I think there's a kind of, you've got to be aware and mindful that people are identifying who they feel they want to identify with and as opposed to saying that's the number we've got. I don't know if that really answers the question, but I think it just throws up that there's more complexity to even just giving the option of having somebody as transgender, non-binary, or the other options you give.
I mean, I think about one of the individuals that you spoke with, who very articulately described their journey, how that through their life they'd been one thing and then another, and then they very much identified as a trans woman, and then they were a woman, and they didn't want any other label because that's how they felt. And to almost make them have a label was again forcing them into an identity that they didn't associate with. So I think it's really tricky, because in some respects, yes, it's great to be able to acknowledge who are you including in your data set, but who am I to say that that person shouldn't be in my data set as a woman?
Yeah, I guess it comes down to kind of the intersectionality point that a lot of you have touched on, that like I think hopefully we've moved past this point of where LGBTQ+ as a monolith. We're now breaking it down into, meeting the people as they are. They are individuals who make up a data set, but the fact that they're 12%, 13% of the data set isn't the full sum of who they are as a person, as they are. One question from me as well, actually. A lot of you talked about kind of having expert interviews at the beginning of your research process. Are there any particular risks you felt that kind of addressed, or any kind of learnings you would take away if you were to do it again next time?
And the main risk we do it for, I'm sure the same for everyone, is so we don't take our own biases in, and we explore a range of different opinions. We all have our internal biases. We have different people in the team, but we wanted to completely separate that from the goal of the research. And for us, like Adrienne is like the leading voice in the world, so we had to speak to her, and she brought up stuff we hadn't even thought about or could find from desk research. So it's to open you up and sometimes help prioritize what you need to dive into, because you can't always do everything in an hour focus group or 15-minute survey, whatever it is.
I think for us, the risk was getting it wrong and adding to the distress of the participants, and the fact that they've already been through this journey, which has been so, in many instances, really difficult and traumatic and emotional. Who are we to go and make that worse? I think that was the fear, was kind of getting it wrong and adding to the already bad experiences that they'd had.
Any other questions from the audience? Down. In which case, thank you very much, everyone. I'll let you go back to your seats now, but I would like to welcome oh yes, claps. Sorry, thank you. And I'm afraid we do have one more session before lunch, and that is Kantar. Oh, where have you gone? Kantar. Oh, we're getting mic'd up, it's fine. Kantar are going to talk to us about their GLAD study, which was actually conducted in the US. So a little bit of a global kind of hop across the pond for us. If you do need, get some water. Otherwise, I'll welcome up to the stage.
Hello, is that working?
Yes.
Yeah, good. Hey, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I am Mark from Kantar's Sustainable Transformation Practice, and this is
Sarah from Kantar. I work in the creative team. I'm also part of the team at Kantar that partner with the Unstereotype Alliance, so I'm involved quite heavily in looking at different ways that we need to push against harmful stereotypes in advertising.
So really, Sarah and I are here today to showcase some great work that our colleagues in the US have done with their partner GLAAD. GLAAD, has everyone heard of GLAAD? Put up your hand if you know who they are. Yeah, that's great. So GLAAD are all about lobbying for better representation of the LGBTQ plus community in the media. So that's film, TV, advertising, of course, which we were talking about, but also gaming as well, like the last presentation we had. Now, the visibility study that we've done with them this year is all about showcasing or putting a spotlight on what people really think about representation in advertising, and that's both with the community, the LGBTQ plus community, but also more mainstream total audiences as well, which we thought were really important. And this study is something that we're going to be doing on an annual basis, so look out for it next year as well. And although this year's was in the US, we think some of the lessons from this are really important everywhere, and I think they'll build on some of what we've already heard about today as well, which is reassuring. Okay, so in the next 20 minutes, I'm going to start off just by talking a little bit about why this is so important, not just for the community and the society, but also brands and businesses as well. And then Sarah's going to tell us a little bit more going into the data on the state of representation in advertising and what it means for brands and marketing. But to start talking about why it's so important, you can't escape the context, the bigger picture of where we're living today. We've talked about this a little bit already today, and I think it will come up again, probably a couple of times. And that's really that we're living in this time of progression and fighting for justice, but that is triggering so much backlash, boycotts, cancelling, all that kind of stuff. We really just can't escape that. We probably all know that amongst this kind of fighting for progression, there's a lot of really loud voices out there that are trying to silence those of us that are fighting for progression. But do those loud voices, do they really represent the majority? And I'm going to share some data with you at some point that will explain that. But I thought this little presentation just before lunch would be a good opportunity to get you to take a stand, if you're able to and willing to do so, and get your views on some of this. Thank you. Good. Take a stretch if you need it. Good. Okay. So stay standing if you agree with these statements. Do you want equal rights and opportunities for everyone? You're allowed to disagree with these, by the way. Yes. Do you agree that, oh, we've got some exciting font changes going on. Do you think advertisers have a responsibility to give LGBTQ plus people visibility within their content? Good, preaching to the choir, I thought, yeah. And that second last one. Do you think representation increases acceptance, so acceptance from more mainstream audiences? Ooh, okay. Slightly more controversial, slightly. And the very last one, do you think it's important to you personally that the companies you buy from as a consumer actively promote diversity and inclusion? Ooh, okay, yeah. Stand back up if it's important to yourselves. Okay, so I'll level with you. I thought amongst this group of people, we would probably have consensus today, and this is probably not the most representative sample of people, but I'm doing this to make the point, as well as just letting you stretch and stand, that if we, and this is the data that I'll show you in a second, if we had a more representative sample of people in here today, most people would also still be standing. So most people do agree with us, essentially. Just take a seat if you want to. And this is the data. So I'll start on the left-hand side. So this is from a global study that we at Kantar do called Global Monitor. That's saying 78% of people globally, so 78 globally, want equal rights for everyone. So a huge number. Going slightly to the right. This is going into Americans from the GLAAD survey that we'll talk about a little bit in a moment. 66% of Americans, and in America, just think how much polarization is happening and what we hear about at the moment. 66% of Americans still think that advertisers have a responsibility to give LGBTQ+ visibility within their content. Moving on, so this is from a survey from the Trevor Project, which work on mental health for LGBTQ+ youth. They're saying half of the non-LGBTQ+ community, Americans again, become more accepting of gay and lesbian people after being exposed to gay and lesbian people in content that they have seen. So it has a tangible impact on acceptance that we see in the data. And then lastly, this is from a new survey that we have looking at how brands are seen at DEI efforts. And this is American data again here. Half of Americans say that it's important that the companies they buy from promote D&I, and that goes up to 63% of the LGBTQ+ community. So quite important to most of the community. So we've put a number on what that means as a risk to brands and businesses from not getting it right. So to get to these numbers, what we've done is taken the buying power of the community and multiply that out by the numbers of people in the community that have experienced discrimination and experienced discrimination in commercial locations where they could be spending money. And that comes up with these huge numbers of the risk to businesses for not getting it right. So nearly $500 billion in the US and 33 billion pounds in the UK. And the reason those numbers are so big is because so many people are experiencing discrimination. So jumping to some UK data here to bring it to life for us here. This is the number of people that have experienced discrimination in the last 12 months. At a total level, how many people have experienced it in kind of more commercial or branded locations? And then you see a jump for the LGBTQ+ community in experiencing discrimination in those places. So there's a lot for brands still to do. But when they get it right, it does pay off for them, as well as mitigating that risk that they face. We can prove in data that we've got that inclusion is a key part of a way that a brand can build and inspire trust with consumers. And a data set that we have with brands for many, many years shows that brands that are more trusted grow more in the long term than the brands that are less trusted. So it really does pay off for brands that get it right. So we'll dive into the state.
Thank you, Mark. So I'm going to talk to you about the study that we did with GLAAD in the US. And you'll hear lots of similarities to some of the other research that we've talked about today, which is a bit of we're not completely conflicting with other data that we've looked at. But what I wanted to talk about first before we go into that data is let's think about the role that advertising can actually play in representing different communities, because I think sometimes one of the mistakes that's made is that thinking that an ad can or even should represent everybody. And if we look at some of the different members of the community, if I give an example, it's very hard to show a bisexual couple in a 30-second ad. How do you do that? How do you do that credibly? How do you do that without it looking like a tick box and just completely turning off the audience? So let's remember that advertising is part of the media landscape. It's not everything, but it does have a really important role to play, we believe. And we say that because we know that when we look at our data, we know that ads that are more positive in their people portrayal, ads that are more progressive in their people portrayal, there's a real commercial benefit. And I know Sam talked about this a few minutes ago in the Q&A. One of the compelling facts we use when we talk to our clients is that DEI representation in advertising isn't just the right thing to do, but there is commercial benefit. So when you have positive portrayals in advertising, you see an uplift in the measures that we use to measure whether an ad is good or not effectively. And those measures are then validated to in-market metrics. So at the end of the day, ads that are more progressive and positive in their portrayal, you see a bigger uplift on brand equity, you see a bigger uplift on short-term sales. So there is real commercial benefit there. But, and of course there's a but, it isn't just about presence. It isn't just about plonking people in ads. And we've got the data to show this. There is no relationship between an ad that has an underrepresented community in it and automatically being a better ad. There's no uplift in these validated brand equity and sales metrics. But when you show those groups in a positive way, that's when you see the big uplift. So it's beyond presence. Presence is important, obviously, but when we move on to look at portrayal and the perspective of those characters that we're including in our ads, getting that right is absolutely crucial. Now, GLAD have done two things. First of all, they've done an audit. Again, like the Mirror on the Industry work, this is obviously based in the US. And they've done an audit of around 400 ads to try and establish, specifically looking at LGBTQ plus communities, to establish the kind of current state of play in the US. They've looked at things like what, whether an ad is representing the community, the quality of that representation, and whether consumers actually notice that representation or not, which is a really important thing. And there's often a big gap between what a consumer sees in an ad and what a brand is intending to portray in an ad. So factoring that in, they then create a scorecard. And what they've looked at is, as I say, around 400 ads from leading spenders in the US on TV advertising, and they found that only 3% of those ads actually were inclusive from an LGBTQ plus perspective. And if you compare that to population stats, 7.2% of the US population are LGBTQ plus, according to Gallup. That's higher for millennials, 11% of millennials, 1 in 5 Gen Z. So there's a big disparity there between what we're seeing in US advertising and obviously what we're seeing in the population. And a really interesting point, the data over on the right-hand side here, and this again is a point that was made earlier, a lot of ads in this space, a lot of LGBTQ plus ads use celebrities. So 71% of that 3% were ads that featured celebrities. And they're often very prominently featured in those ads. And you know, what we find is that this doesn't necessarily make for effective advertising. I'll go on and talk about that in a moment, but it is a very prominent feature. Now, just to take a step back from that US data a moment, and again, this is where you'll see links to what we saw earlier as well. Our wider pre-testing database that is global in its coverage and the work we do with the Unstereotype Alliance allows us also to audit ads and audit the ads that we've tested and look at the quality of those ads as well. And we too see very low levels of representation of the LGBTQ plus community. And again, absolute stagnation over time. So only 1% of our global database have recognisable LGBTQ plus characters in it. Slightly higher in some markets, like Brazil, for example. The UK stat was bang on 3%. We're in complete agreement there, which is really good to see, but very, very low levels. And if we return to that study with GLAD, what we did alongside the audit that GLAD did themselves, so this is where the Kantar study comes in, we actually talked to people about their perceptions of LGBT plus advertising. So, you know, what are they thinking about what they're seeing? Are they seeing themselves reflected on screen? Is it important that they see themselves reflected on screen? Now, we partnered with them in this study really to get a current state of play. And explicitly, we said to consumers, you know, can you recognise LGBTQ plus characters in ads that we show you? And actually, 2/3 of the population we spoke to, that 64% there, they actually believe that current LGBTQ plus representation in advertising is actually clear enough to qualify as proper representation of the community. So that belief is out there that, yeah, I'd notice it when I saw it. But actually, what we then did is we showed them 5 ads. We showed them 5 ads from the US Super Bowl, all ads that included LGBTQ plus characters, and only 39% of people actually noticed that there was representation in there. So actually the disparity between what they think they would notice and what they actually notice is quite big. And this is where I'm returning to the celebrity point, actually, because 3 out of those 5 ads that we showed people included celebrity cameos, known celebrities in the LGBTQ plus community. I think it's the Doritos ad that includes Elton John, for example. But when we asked people whether they noticed any LGBTQ plus characters in those ads, the 3 ads that included the celebrity cameos got the lowest levels of recognition. So that celebrity presence isn't necessarily working as the best way of showing that representation. And actually, you can see it's the McDonald's ad that had the highest levels of representation. I appreciate that you don't know the ads that I'm speaking about here, so you'll have to trust me a little bit here, but this McDonald's ad showed a real life human story. It was empathetic. It had a realistic portrayal of an everyday LGBTQ plus couple. And that was much more recognised, much more appreciated, rather than relying on those celebrity cameos. And actually, the data over on the other side of the chart is really powerful here, because when we asked our respondents about what mattered to them in terms of what they saw on screen in these representations, it was the displays of empathy, humanity, real life stories. That's what's really important, much more important than featuring celebrity cameos. So using celebrities, it's something that happens a lot in advertising, happens a lot more in LGBTQ plus advertising. I think the comparison of that 71% versus 29% of US advertising in total tends to use a celebrity. So it happens a lot, but it isn't, shouldn't be the first thing that you fall back on to choose as your way of making that first step into representing the LGBTQ plus community. So having seen the importance really of empathy and real life stories, it isn't a surprise that our study then found that most LGBTQ plus people, so specifically talking to this community, 88% of them actually believe that brands should strive for positive representation that's really multidimensional. And again, this point's been made already, but it's a really important point. And actually, when they reflect about what they're actually seeing on screen at the moment, that's not what they're seeing. So this same group think that current ads aren't living up to what they need. They aren't living up to this fundamental requirement, if you like. We're not seeing those multi-layered, realistic, empathetic portrayals. And actually, when an LGBTQ plus character actually appears in an ad, then more than half of respondents are actually feeling they're being reduced to that single trope, to that single tick box, just to identify them as a box, as an identity, if you like. Now, as I said earlier, when we think about the role of advertising, we can't expect a 30-second TV ad, a static image, to do everything. So it's a really tricky task to try and portray more nuance, but it's a really important one. And it's something that we've all got to be, moving beyond that presence, as I said earlier. So those are a couple of the kind of tactical watch outs that we came across, and the full report, which I'm sure we can circulate to everybody, has a lot more of those in it. But what's really important, again, I return to the kind of commercial benefit, the commercial argument. When we look at LGBTQ plus advertising specifically, we can see a positive impact on brand equity, which is the data on the left-hand side of the chart, and we see a positive impact on purchase intention, claimed purchase intention, which is over on the right. And you get a minority that react negatively. So you've got those red boxes there, those red bars, but they're much smaller than the green bars, the people that are reacting positively. And that gulf is only going to get wider over time, particularly when we see Gen Z getting more and more purchasing power, for example. So we're going to see smaller reds, bigger greens going forward. So just a couple of slides before we let you go to your lunch. And there were a couple of things we wanted to talk about in terms of having spoken about the importance of advertising, the role it can play. What should brands be doing now? What should they be thinking about? And as part of our consumer perception study, we collected attitudes towards the community, towards LGBTQ plus community, towards the types of relationships that people have with the community. So we could segment. We're a research agency. Obviously, we put people in groups, segment people according to those attitudes. And you can actually see that the pro LGBTQ plus group is the majority. So 57% of people would consider themselves as accepting of the community, and specifically that means that they respect their gender identity, they respect their their sexual orientation. But that really drops off when we kind of get tighter into those attitudes. So when we move from acceptance to allyship, and then allyship to advocacy, those levels really drop. And what that means from a brand point of view is that people largely support the community and support the representation, but they're not necessarily going to be fighting battles and standing up when controversy hits. So you can't rely on the support of the total population in those times. So what do you do when controversy hits? And these are some examples from the US, examples of being brave, examples of continuing on your journey in different ways. So we have an example from Oreo, the Mondelez brand in the US, who stood strong in silence. So this was a campaign where Oreo was partnering with PFLAG in the US to support LGBTQ plus families. And it was a very, very successful campaign. But they had a specific organisation, a conservative organisation called 1 Million Mums, who threatened to boycott the brand, but they simply did not acknowledge it. They stayed silent, they moved on, they continued. Another example, again, from a Mondelez brand, Responding with Love. And this is a campaign a little bit old now that had an interracial couple in it back in 2013. That was actually quite unusual. And there were lots and lots of negative comments online. So what Honeymaid did is they then aired a video that showed a couple of artists with those comments printed out. They rolled up the comments, they made them into a sculpture spelling out the word love. So they responded with positivity, they responded with kindness back. And then the third example about kind of doubling down, redoubling the message. This is the General Mills brand Cheerios in the US. They had, again, at the time, quite unusual, a commercial showing a mixed race family, and they had lots and lots of hate messages online. What did they do? They brought that family back for the campaign the year after and the year after that. They stuck with their message, they stuck with their talent. You know, they really made the point and stayed brave to what they believed in. So that's it from us today, you know, talking about the importance of representation, but also talking about consumer perceptions of how they're represented and how they would like to be represented. And hopefully we've got time for a couple of questions if anybody has them.
Oh, has a green light. Not hear me? I'm going to keep talking. There we go. Just have to reclip it. It's fine. Yeah, 71% of LGBT representation is with a celebrity, but that is such a lower recognition when you actually. The fact that people look at an advert with Elton John or Jonathan Van Ness and they're like, no gay people in there, no queer people in there. It's shocking. Do you have any examples of like where it's done right, or like what should brands take away from that kind of lower recognition, even though they keep plugging celebrities in?
I think it's because those were celebrity cameos. So in a lot of instances, and this is you know, related to any kind of advertising really. Actually, when you bung a celebrity in there, they have to have a role, they have to be connected to the brand, there has to be a fit there. And I think a lot of the time we're seeing ads in the LGBTQ plus space using celebrities just to simply go, oh, we're this kind of ad, you know, this gives us that shortcut. And consumers are smarter than that. They're not looking, they don't see that as representation, they don't see that as mirroring their own personal experiences. So they're almost kind of just ignoring that element, and the kind of ads they're looking for are the kind of ads that have that deeper empathy, that personal stories that they can actually relate to. And you know, we can enjoy those ads. Didn't come up in terms of being recognized as having celebrity content. They were good ads nonetheless. I'm not saying they're not, you know, they were enjoyable ads, but they are not doing the job that the brand managers necessarily expected them to do in terms of representing that community. So I think, you know, in some instances, and again, this is true, as I say, of all types of advertising, we need to make sure that we are representing our consumers, representing the story we want to tell by using the right talent and not just making a shortcut in that way.
Yeah, just echoing that, like, we're not having tick boxes, we're doing authenticity here.
Absolutely.
I would just echo the montage point from earlier. So that JVN Anthony screenshot, it took me a while to get that screenshot because it was like gone like that in that GM Netflix ad. So they really, I mean, it's no wonder people aren't noticing it when it really is just done as a tick box exercise.
Yeah, absolutely. Any questions from the audience? Yeah, Lou. Nick? Oh, you already have a mic. You're prepped. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. It was really interesting and obviously, yeah, really interesting to see what's happening across the pond. But my question is there anything in your data that answers the question of whether it's better for a brand to try and fail or to not try at all?
I think some of the data that you showed at the beginning, Mark, in terms of an expectation from consumers, we see that in a lot of the studies that we do. So yeah, I mean, certainly consumers think you should be doing this. Absolutely.
There's a clear expectation from most of the majority of people that brands should be helping progression in society, and if they don't do it, you're gonna risk alienating large and often growing communities of people. And there's lots of signs of data, not just the LGBTQ populations, but a lot of the underserved communities are generally quite growing segments of the population. So brands that don't cater to them will set themselves up for failure.
Yeah, thank you. Any other questions? Oh, really good. Thank you so much. And that was really interesting, especially getting the global perspective. All right. You'll all be thrilled to know now is lunchtime. There is food back where you collected your badges. And I think if you could retake your seats in about 55 minutes just before 2 o'clock, that would be grand. But thank you very much, everyone.
Everybody, and thank you to the team for a fabulous lunch. And I hope that the next few papers, well, I know the next few papers will stop us going into a post-sandwich coma. But thank you for a lovely lunch. Right, so we've got 2 papers coming up next, and then we'll do as we did in the session before, which was we'll have some Q&A after the 2 papers. So I'm not going to do any more talking. I'm going to hand over to Emma Catterall at Drinkaware, who will take us through our first paper in a session all about resolve and resilience.
I click next on this. Yes, okay, great. So hi, I'm Emma. I'm head of research at Drinkaware, and I'm here to give you a very brief look into some research that we conducted last year on alcohol use and harm among gender and sexual minorities. So I put on a slight trigger warning here because I will be talking about experiences of harm, and I wanted to be mindful that of potential sensitivity around this topic for some individuals. But though I will only touch on this on at a very, very broad level, but I will let you know when I kind of get to that point in case anyone needs to maybe zone out. Okay. So first off, I wanted to introduce Drinkaware in case you haven't heard of us. Drinkaware is the UK's leading alcohol charity, and we work to reduce alcohol harm by using our expertise to provide knowledge and support to governments, industry, communities and individuals to enable them to make more informed decisions about alcohol and reducing the harm it can cause. We were established through an agreement between the UK government and alcohol industry and are funded primarily by voluntary and unrestricted donations from UK alcohol producers, retailers and supermarkets. We are governed independently and our funders have no say in what or how we conduct research. So alcohol. It is a staple of British culture, but is also a leading cause of preventable death and disability. In the UK alone, alcohol use causes major health, social and economic consequences, estimated at between 21 and 52 billion a year. In addition, there are over 1 million admissions to hospital for alcohol-related causes. And in 2021, which is the latest data available, there were over 9,600 deaths directly attributable to alcohol, which is the highest level it has ever been. While the prevalence and impact of alcohol has been extensively studied among the general population via the National Health Surveys, for example, it is being increasingly recognised that there's a growing recognition that of the unique experiences of gender and sexual minorities in relation to their alcohol use. And this recognition is crucial because the harmful effects of alcohol are not shared equally within populations. Some groups experience more harm than others. Reports from charities as well as academic studies consistently find that gender and sexual minority individuals are more likely to drink alcohol and drink at more harmful levels compared to the general population, and therefore are at higher risk of harm. So a few years ago, DrinkAware began a stream of research looking at overlooked populations. And these are populations who are underrepresented in the literature on alcohol harm and are either more likely to be hazardous drinkers and or be disproportionately affected by alcohol harm. And to find out more about this population, we commissioned a large review conducted by LGBT health researchers out of the University of Brighton to basically bring together all the existing evidence on alcohol use among this population. And what they found was that while there is consistency in the finding that gender and sexual minority individuals are more likely to be hazardous drinkers compared to the general population, studies tended to suffer from small sample sizes, which limited comparisons within the LGBTQ+ subgroups. They use inconsistent measures of alcohol use, limiting comparability across studies. There's little to no data at all on gender diverse individuals. And there is a focus on typical consumption measures. So like how many days in the last week they drank or how many units they drink. And while these may identify populations at risk, they do little to inform public health initiatives or messages to reduce harm. So to address these gaps, we aimed to collect data that would provide one of the most comprehensive overviews of alcohol consumption, drinking behaviour and experiences of alcohol harm among gender and sexual minorities in the UK. And the purpose of this was to identify health risks and disparities, to fill knowledge gaps, as well as inform messaging, support services, interventions, and public health initiatives to reduce alcohol harm among this population. So each year we commission YouGov to conduct our DrinkAware Monitor, which is a large representative survey of UK adults used to track and understand the nation's drinking. And last year we decided to boost the sample to include over 3,000 individuals who identified as LGBTQ+, along with more than 5,000 individuals who identified as cisgender and heterosexual. And we did this so that we can compare the two in order to highlight alcohol use and harm that was specific to LGBTQ+ communities. Now, the monitor asks questions on various aspects of alcohol use, including how, where and why people drink, their propensity and willingness to cut back, along with measures such as mental health, concern about other people's drinking, help-seeking behaviour, and our theme last year was the negative impacts of other people's drinking. And broadly, our findings sort of reaffirm the prevailing view that this population are more likely to be hazardous drinkers compared to cisgender heterosexual individuals, as assessed by the Alcohol Use Disorders Identification Test, which is a validated alcohol screening tool developed by the World Health Organization. However, what we found was that this difference in the propensity to be hazardous drinkers doesn't stem from LGBTQ+ individuals being drinking more often or even more alcohol overall than cisgender heterosexual individuals, as actually they're very similar. Instead, it comes from differences in the pattern of drinking, so differences in the way people drink, with LGBTQ+ individuals more likely than their cisgender heterosexual counterparts to binge drink, so consume a lot of alcohol in a single session. So that suggests that when LGBTQ+ drinkers do drink, there's a greater tendency to drink more. And I should point out that the green and red arrows that you'll see on the charts and things indicate statistically significant differences between the two groups. So it is this way of drinking that results in the LGBTQ+ population as a group being more likely to be identified as hazardous and harmful drinkers, on alcohol screening tools. This pattern of drinking also comes with riskier consequences than, say, spreading your drinking out over the course of a week, which makes LGBTQ+ individuals more likely to experience every adverse consequence of drinking listed in the Alcohol Use Disorders Identification Test, such as experiencing blackouts about what happened the night before, experiencing guilt after drinking, or incurring alcohol-related injuries. And this pattern of drinking also potentially exposes LGBTQ+ adults to experiencing greater harm as a result of other people's drinking. And we see this in the data. And this is where I'm about to talk about some experiences of harm. So if anybody would like to zone out for the next slide, please feel free to do so. So more than half of LGBTQ+ adults have experienced at least one negative impact as a result of other people's drinking, compared to 40% of cisgender heterosexual adults. And these negative impacts range from fairly minor harms, such as feeling anxious around someone else's drinking or having your sleep disrupted, to more severe harms, including physical assault, incidents involving police contact, and sexual harm. And you can see from the chart that LGBTQ+ individuals are more likely to experience every single type of harm we asked about than cisgender heterosexual adults. They also face more severe impacts, including sexual harm, being physically threatened, having had to move residence, or having police contact. And LGBTQ+ adults are between 45 and 56% more likely to experience each of these harms compared to cisgender heterosexual adults, which highlights the disproportionate vulnerability of LGBTQ+ adults to harm resulting from someone else's drinking. Now, some of this harm may be linked to the different preferences in where LGBTQ+ and cisgender heterosexual adults tend to drink. Now, while we find that both populations are most likely to drink when out with a meal or at a get-together at someone else's house, LGBTQ+ individuals tend to drink more in the nighttime economy and when socializing with friends, whereas cisgender heterosexual individuals prefer drinking at home with their partners or with family. And this difference may reflect the importance of nighttime economy spaces to LGBTQ+ communities. Research has long highlighted the importance of alcohol, bars, clubs, the commercial scene to the social lives of LGBTQ+ people, providing safe spaces for them to meet, build communities, and be themselves. However, these settings also promote excessive drinking culture, where non-drinking can be met with hostility and therefore peer pressure to drink can be high. And we find indications of this peer pressure in the data, whether that peer pressure was overt or not, when we asked about people about the reasons for drinking. Therefore, the very spaces meant for inclusivity may inadvertently contribute to hazardous drinking behaviours and increased harm among LGBTQ+ individuals. However, this picture is not uniform across LGBTQ+ subgroups. The LGBTQ+ umbrella masks significant variation within groups, highlighting the necessity of looking within each population when looking at health behaviours and particularly alcohol use. For example, gay and bi pansexual men are the riskiest drinkers with regular and higher alcohol consumption, but they're not significantly different to cisgender heterosexual men. By contrast, a significant disparity exists between LGBTQ+ and cisgender heterosexual women, with LGBT women more likely to be hazardous drinkers. However, this disparity is driven almost entirely by bi and pansexual women. Lesbian women, on the other hand, are among the least risky drinkers, along with individuals who identify as either transgender or non-binary. Contrary to the limited research that has been conducted, gender minorities actually display the least riskiest drinking profile. Instead, it was bi and pansexual women who stand out, despite having the highest proportion of non-drinkers, being less likely to drink frequently. They're the most likely to binge drink, report symptoms associated with alcohol dependence, experience negative consequences and impacts from other people's drinking as well as their own, and are more likely to say that they drink to cope, which is an important predictor of harmful drinking. They're also the least confident in being able to find support, which departs from a general trend of increased help-seeking behaviour, particularly help for themselves among the broader LGBTQ+ population. However, although there is this greater tendency for help-seeking, is it perhaps an optimistic finding, despite how low the percentages are, they're significantly less likely to deem the services that they do support as supportive. So where do LGBTQ+ people go for support? Well, we find that the most risky drinkers tend to avoid traditional support services, such as GPs or other health professionals. Instead, they turn to non-traditional options. So they turn to apps, they turn to digital services, alcohol-related charities. and we find some evidence that this is possibly influenced by negative past experiences with healthcare services. And this highlights a clear need for mainstream service providers to become more inclusive and understanding of LGBTQ+ individuals and their specific needs. So what's next for this data? Well, we understand that with this great data comes kind of like great responsibility, and we have a lot more findings that I can obviously go over here, but our plan over the next few months is to bring together charities and experts in this field to share our findings and discuss a way forward, how we can move forward in a way that we can make a positive impact on reducing alcohol-related harm among this overlooked population. And with that, I'd like to thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. What an astonishing amount of data, and I'm just sifting through it in my mind, and I know we've got time for questions. So in a moment, I'm going to introduce Harry, and then we will, after that, be able to unpick some of this together, but that was fabulous. So Harry Kinnear from Space Doctors.
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I really actually didn't realize how much it was going to be a pleasure to be here until I sat down and started listening to everyone talking and felt incredibly comfortable. So thank you for having me, and thank you for running the event as well. So my name is Harry Kinnear. I'm an associate director at Space Doctors. Space Doctors is a cultural, semiotics, and creative consultancy, and we're a part of Humanate, which is a bigger business, and I'm not here with my colleague, Bri McIntosh, who is unfortunately ill with the coronavirus, so won't be joining us today. So I'll try my very best to represent his thoughts, but I might be a little bit more note-based than I had intended to in the first place. But we wanted to talk to you guys about LGBTQIA+ culture, brand culture around that, and challenge a little bit our idea and understanding of what inclusion means and what we mean when we use the word inclusion. And maybe present and start to open a conversation about something a little bit different, and maybe an evolution of what that is, inclusion could mean in the form of something that we have called an expansion mindset. So there's going to be some questions and dialogue. You know, this is about thinking critically about our actions. Is absolutely not about erasing anyone's inclusion. Don't worry about that. But I do want to start this dialogue and start to challenge some of the ideas that we take for granted in our business and see how we can evolve them a little bit. So our premise is that inclusion is perhaps provoking very extreme reactions. In this talk we've seen today already, we've highlighted the importance of the cultural context in which these things are happening, the importance of understanding the context in which the people we think about and talk to exist in to understand what's going on. But I think we're also aware of some really quite, controversial, some quite violent, quite horrific things that happen in that culture that we're looking to address. And one of those examples you might be familiar with. This is a picture of Dylan Mulvaney, and this is a picture on the right of Kid Rock, who thought we would be talking about Kid Rock today. But I think what is important about what this example, and I won't go into the details too much because I assume everyone is vaguely familiar with it, but what we can see from this combination of images is that inclusion and the extreme reactions that come from it is causing a real culture clash. It's a real issue that we're looking at here. We can see by the fact that Kid Rock has chosen to take a rifle and shoot up some Bud Light, that this isn't just a casual thing. There's something that is really quite threatening in the core of what this is. And I think this is because culturally, we sort of developed and devolved into this narrative of kind of hatred and opposition, where all these different perspectives that are involved in this idea of inclusion are offered futures that they don't want. They offer a future in which everyone is presented with an existential threat. Everyone is presented with the idea that they have to give up something to be in this new included world. On the one hand is a perceived loss of values and an erosion of identity. And on the other is an inclusion into a really quite hostile environment that doesn't preach the values of acceptance. Why do we want to be included into Kid Rock's world? This is how he treats the world around him. And I think surely this clashes fundamentally with the idea of what a brand is that supports a community, and is exactly the type of reason why they get accused of being tokenistic and shallow in the way that they present their support. Because fundamentally here, if Bud Light can withdraw their support for the LGBTQIA+ community, then it's being treated as a kind of dodgy product line that is being withdrawn because it's no longer safe for consumption. And that's not what support is. That's not what allyship is. I think we can all agree on that. So is it possible that this narrative is being driven by the principle and our current understanding of what diversity and inclusion is, and specifically the word inclusion and all that the word inclusion implies? Because what inclusion implies is a center to be included within. You know, we've touched on all these things today already, and we've heard the little kind of kernels of these thoughts already. But one of the words that, and the phrases I picked up on a lot is, you know, welcome in, invite in when we talk about inclusion. And what that implies is an in-group and an out-group dynamic. And membership, therefore, is defined by non-membership. And conflict arises when you conflate non-membership with membership. There's going to be tension there. So what they do is they focus on difference rather than similarity. And they focus on definitions rather than possibility. So what we wanted to talk about is this idea of expansion and what this could leave room for if we think about how we might want to evolve our understanding when we use the word inclusion. And I think this can leave room for a new paradigm for representation and diversity that is centered around this idea of what expansion is. So rather than inclusion into a center, we can expand what we mean when we talk about mainstream culture. Can we find a way to expand our definitions of what normal is and can be? Can we expand the possibility for human experience as defined as normal in a way that takes away nothing from anyone, but offers more to everyone? There was a little image of one of my favorite people in the world at the moment, who's called Alok Vaid-Menon, in the Kantar presentation. And they've got an incredible quote, which I love so much, that's really at the center of this for me. And the quote is, "The goal of gender neutral language is to get rid of gender normativity. It is not to get rid of everyone's gender." That's not the point of it. We don't want to take anything away from anyone. So the key tenet of expansionism and how it differs from inclusion is that it doesn't ask anyone to compromise on any part of their identity. It doesn't take anything away from anyone. It doesn't ask anyone to conform to a defined way of being. There are not qualifying factors. There's no need to justify your existence. The only thing it asks is for people to connect to a shared sense of humanity and a belief that everyone deserves to be afforded the same level of humanity. And there's a really important thing in here, because crucially, this means that we have to change the playing field for everyone. So rather than including excluded groups, we are expanding the possibility of what normal looks like. And this means we're expanding the possibility of what normal looks like for cis, white, heterosexual, social conservatives, as well as for those who identify as genderqueer, because expansion has to be for everyone. You can't just expand a single set of people. And I know this feels a little bit untangible, so I was hoping we could play a little TVC, because everyone likes a video in the middle of this, and offer an idea of what expansion could look like for brands in communication. So hopefully this will play.
ये किन्नर भी ना परेशान करने आ जाते हैं।
अरे नहीं माँ जी, कुछ लेने नहीं देने आई हूँ। बगल में मेरी चाय की दुकान है और बारिश में सब अटके हुए थे, तो सोची सबको एक एक कप चाय पिला दूं। लीजिए लीजिए ना, ला आप भी लीजिए। आती हो?
अरे सुनो,
हाँ
जरा इधर आओ।
अरे नहीं माँ जी, आज पैसे नहीं लूंगी।
पैसे कौन दे रहा है? सदा सुखी रहो।
Brook Bond Red Leather, स्वाद अपनेपन का।
Great. So that was I draw attention to two things in particular as well. One, that was for Unilever. It's a big mainstream brand, huge, right? And it's also in India, because I wanted to also stretch our thinking slightly away from the US and the UK as well, and understand that this isn't just a certain place in the world where only certain people can talk about this. This is a global thing, right? Part of expansion, so it's global. But I also want you to think about what we've just seen in here, right? Okay, and I think to describe it, we see two main roles in this piece of communications, but both of those roles allow people to exist outside of the stereotypes and the assumptions that we make of them typically. Both are allowed to expand from the roles they're typically cast into when depicted in culture. So we have the older, socially conservative person who is allowed to overcome her prejudice. And we have the transgender person who is able to be more than the beggar that they are typically thought of or often viewed as in Indian society. And we see the role of Brooke Bond as the facilitator of this because it is a branded piece of communications, right? And we are bringing people together there. But it leaves us with the question, right? Who is this ad speaking to? And what is it offering them? And in our opinion, the answer is it's talking to its core audience. And it's offering them a chance to grow, to be more than they are defined as. So what can expansion mean for the work that we do with brands, but also thinking about the work we do on a day-to-day basis? Well, I think if we think about how brands can adopt a more expansionist mindset, I would offer 3 thoughts. I've lost my cursor. Come on, come back. There we are. The first one is that expansionism is not tokenism, right? If you want to be an ally to the LGBTQIA+ community, then you need to give them power, give them economic power, employ them, train them, pay them, because allyship is not and is never a product that can be withdrawn in the way that Bud Light did. It has to be action. The second is think about why inclusion feels like something that you should be doing as a brand, right? Why do we need to be inclusive? And we've touched upon this in some of the talks already today, because it's fundamentally this idea of inclusion or expansion, as we'd rather reframe it as, is that it fundamentally makes businesses better. How can expansion help us grow our business, whether it's the people we want to sell our products to and services to? How can we increase the number of perspectives that nourish our brand when we talk to people about our brand? How can we, grow our business fundamentally at the bottom line through this idea of expansionism? Because expansionism isn't a nice to have; it's a table stake that makes our business stronger. If there's anything we can learn from the climate crisis, just to throw in another depressing topic into today, but monocultures are vulnerable. Diverse cultures are more resilient fundamentally, and we should all agree to that in any part of our brand. But finally, the third point is, what does expansionism look like for your brand in particular? Because it has to still speak to your brand strategy and your brand identity and understand that it is an expression of what your brand wants to be and wants to become and wants to grow into. Because performative inclusion, as we also already know, is not going to cut it for anyone involved. So that's about thinking what we might do for our brands, but let's challenge ourselves with the thought that maybe in our day-to-day work, we're in pursuit of differences more than similarities. That maybe when we look to divide and categorize and find differences in our reports, that we're trying to group people in ways that are limiting their human experience. We're trying to include them when we should be expanding our understanding of what people are like. So to end the session, we'd like to pose a couple of questions around what this means for our own sector. So if this research is built on the concept of difference, segmentation, statistical significance, pen portraits, we drill into and celebrate that difference rather than commonality. We love putting messy humans behind walls of data. Is it time to look beyond these ways of categorization and look more at what people have in common? After all, at the end of the day, they're all engaging in the same activity, a purchase or engagement with a provider. So does expansionism help move us on, particularly in qualitative research, of challenges around tokenistic inclusion? Or on the flip side, is it our role to still be the hand behind the curtain that seeds expansionism as representation? And to take it right back to where we started this session, can an approach of expansion in the context of representation be the in plain sight solution to move us beyond a divisive culture of cancellation? Thanks very much.
Darcy. Emma, will you jump up as well? We've got plenty of time for questions, and actually I thought, given that, you know, we've all had plenty of time to talk to each other now, if you've got questions or observations that actually pick up on all of the papers we've heard today, because there are so many themes that I've seen weaving in and out of each other, I think it would be a great space to have a conversation amongst each other as well as ask some questions to these guys. So does anyone have a question that they'd like to kick us off with before we try and have a conversation? Like a tentative hand. Go on.
I was interested in the idea around expansion and wondering if you'd seen it in popular media done well outside of advertising in such a way that made you think, oh, it'd be good if advertising could do this as well, or if the idea had come from somewhere else.
It's a good question. I think that one of the places we've seen it the most actually is thinking earlier is sort of literature, particularly romance literature is a really great place where it's about finding and looking for new stories to tell. I once was talking to a person who was a developer for TV, and they said the reason why you know, diverse stories are so great is because people haven't heard them before in the mainstream. It makes them interesting. It makes new content for people to engage in. So yeah, I think that advertising has a really important role to play for that, for the brands. But I think that we see it already everywhere. You know, we just have to look for it amongst all the noise that we also see in culture.
Yeah, I've read quite a bit about how fan fiction in particular is a space that is giving birth to a lot of expansive thinking groups of people. Right, another question. I think there was one over this side of the room. Yeah, go on.
So both those two last presentations both talk about men in different ways, kind of. An issue with drinking very clearly amongst men. And then I was also in Harry, your presentation, it was the idea of expansionism not leaving behind, or maybe leaving behind those that are kind of the status quo in power. So my kind of question is there just an issue with men, maybe more broadly, that's worth airing?
I mean, yes, obviously. But I think I've had some questions from clients before that are always sort of focusing in and looking to talk to a very specific group of people or be perceived to be talking to a really specific group of people. And in all the research that we do, you know, the cultural research, even looking at the kind of semiotics of how that, you know, is communicated in culture, I think that the one thing that we always bump into is the idea that you can't separate, you know, intersectionality from anything. You know, it's always there. There's never a single answer to one thing. And it's very hard to change, you know, the reality for people unless you take into account that intersectionality. And so I think that it's not that there's a problem with men, because, you know, that's a very reductive, you know, idea to kind of just subscribe to, but it's that the people who hold the power currently are the men, and if we want to change the reality for everyone involved, then they have to change. So every conversation about expansion or inclusion or D&I or whatever it has to, it can't exclude anyone from that conversation, because I think it's really contributing to a culture of hatred that we're seeing in, you know, manifest in Kid Rock. I pointed behind me and I realized my own photos. I meant Kid Rock. But yeah, I don't know what you think.
I can really only speak to like sort of my sort of only field of sort of research, and just when it comes to like looking at the differences between a LGBTQ+ and a cisgender heterosexual population, it seems that gender is the overriding sort of variable when it comes to those, whereas we just don't see that in well, among women. There's definitely more distinct differences among women than there is among men.
I wanted to ask a question, Emma, about, I know you might not have shared all of the findings yet, but I'm interested in generally when you present back to some of your stakeholders, and particularly with topics such as this, what sorts of recommendations will you be giving them, if you can share just anything at all, in terms of what they do with these really quite alarming?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the I mean, I suppose it was expected, but it, nevertheless sort of disappointing in the sense that it's such a bit of a bleak picture. You know, it's not just alcohol use that we looked at, it's also other addictive behaviors, such as they're more likely to smoke, more likely to use illegal drugs, more likely to even score positive for problem gambling. You know, there's this whole kind of more likely to score worse, have poor mental health. So there's like this whole sort of host of sort of co-occurring sort of behaviors. But I think one of the most sort of prominent recommendations is that, and to touch on the data that I presented here today, was to kind of address the sort of culture of excessive kind of drinking, and it's providing sort of, I guess, other ways to enjoy those spaces that LGBTQ plus people find so important and central, but a way to kind of remove the importance of alcohol from those spaces. And, you know, maybe something as easy as encouraging sort of more no and low alcohol products and things like that, or those types of messaging, but it's to address that kind of culture, which seems to be the single most thing that distinguishes LGBTQ plus drinkers from cisgender heterosexual drinkers. So be that one I can recommend.
Okay. If there aren't more questions, which I hope that there are, right, we have another question, but then I'd also love to hear some reflections on the day so far and some themes that we've heard.
Hi, thank you very much both for your presentations. Primarily for Emma, the Drinkaware presentation you gave. I was just wondering how we heard from Gender and Legal in General earlier about kind of approaching sensitive topics and how you can ask questions that people might not want to answer. You covered in your survey some pretty sensitive topics. How did you approach asking people about sexual abuse, about anxiety, about that kind of thing within your survey? As a follow-up to that as well, kind of disconnected, but another question on your presentation as well is, have you seen a trend of people now not drinking in the LGBT or the wider LGBTQ space? Because, you know, a lot of my friends actually used to binge drink and now don't drink. So I was wondering whether there's that deeper dive in terms of people that have actually gone the other way, cut out entirely, and then why, you know, whether any of those behaviours or events have then spurred people on to not drink.
So I can't speak to trends in that population because this was a single sort of study that we did last year. But more generally, like we've seen quite a big increase in non-drinking among particularly young people, and less frequent drinking among kind of mostly all age groups, to be honest. So that's a positive trend. When it comes to how do we ask those kind of sensitive sort of questions, I mean, thankfully we commission YouGov to sort of deal with those things, but you know, it's always kind of putting it out, a disclaimer that they don't have to answer questions and that they don't want to, and finding, you know, the question order in a questionnaire and things like that is you know, are quite standard sort of approaches. Yeah.
There was a question here. Hello.
Hi, Asad from the Unmistakable. I was very curious about expansionism rather than inclusion, given the business I run is all about inclusion. So I was thinking, do we need to rebrand around expansionism? And I was curious about how people are responding to it, because I wonder if it is a rebrand of a word that people are still grappling with understanding what it means. And is there something that sits deeper beneath this, which is in a time where economies are shrinking and when our attention spans are shrinking, and actually doing this kind of stuff is quite rare, we're actually not wanting to expand as people. If anything, we're reducing into our own little worlds and our own screens and phones. So I was just wondering how people are responding to that sense of expansionism, because it certainly feels to me like people generally don't want to be doing that right now.
No, it's a good question, and how it's being received, I think mixed reception, you know, because I think one of the aims of it in the first place is to, as I sort of said, is just to gently challenge our assumptions about what we do, and I think that there's lots of, you know, representations of poorly executed inclusive practices that feel quite lazy and feel very tokenistic. You know, we still every year talk about you know, rainbow washing and Pride Month, and you know, if we just do something in that month, then we've done it and we've checked boxes. Was another great phrase that we've heard a lot today. You know, I think there's definitely a case of for arguing that people don't feel represented in that 1 month because it doesn't represent their lives. You know, it's limiting. But I think that, and to answer your question, your point about people withdrawing down, I think there's absolutely an argument for people wanting to not be included in any sort of idea of this, and also acknowledge that the word expansionism has a bit of kind of neo-colonial underroots to it, and like, let's grab as much as possible, and have this big land. So, it's not an ideal and it's not a perfect word in any way, but I think, and people do, want to maintain and defend their identities often, especially when contrasted with a much kind of more powerful and seemingly aggressive mainstream culture that seeks to absorb them, and in many cases, take advantage of what they offer and repackage it and sell it for other things. So of course there's lots of defense around that idea of expansionism, and of course it's not the only way to look at it. But I think for me, what is exciting about it is that Alok quote, which is really, if it's communicated well, or we need to think about what our aim is to give everyone more choice, give everyone more, and I think that there's this sort of sense of a possibility of proliferation that is exciting at its heart, where my most toxic, masculine straight white friends don't have to quite be like that, and that they're given an option to be a different type of person, in the same way that I'm given an option to go into my place of work and not feel like I need to hide anything about myself. So no, it's not perfect. Yes, there's resistance to it, but at its heart, it's the pursuit of a proliferation of choice for everyone. And I think that's quite a nice goal to hold on to.
Have you shared this with some of your clients, and how have you reflected on what that might mean for their brands and businesses?
I've shared it with a couple of clients, and their reactions are quite interesting. Because equally they say, oh, do we need to rebrand? Often we're actually sitting under a big sign that says diversity inclusion when we're talking about it. But I think it's about being gently provocative.
Yeah.
And I think lots of brands are aware that, I mean, without sounding sort of rubbish about it, but that there's a real benefit for them ultimately, and that if they do it wrong, there's a real risk to them as well. That's clearer. So there's definitely interest.
Yeah, back to those same 3 benefits that I think we heard from Channel 4 this morning. I'd love to hear some reflections on the day so far, because I refuse to let us go to the break 3 minutes early. So we're going to have some reflections. Hello.
Hi, thanks for the last 2 presentations, and indeed the ones so far today. So I don't come from a research background, I come from marketing, and I am someone who falls within the trans umbrella. And what I've observed today is that there has been, to how I've perceived it, is a tendency to group cis men, cis women, and then the gender rebels all together, which in itself is useful, but actually not, because we're not a third gender, and there is a huge amount of diversity within that group, as we all know and have discussed in some detail or not today. I wonder if people in this room feel like moving forward, now that these studies are underway, now that we understand that there are ways to reach these difficult to communicate with minorities, we can start to see, even no matter how small a data set, teased out, like the experience of a trans man, like the erasure of trans men in the media, full stop. Like, they exist, and it is so completely different to trans women. It is so completely different to people who are gender fluid, non-binary. I know there's never going to be enough data, and where do you draw the line? But I would welcome hearing if we're going to be hearing more of this data this time next year, because we talk about inclusivity, but I haven't seen anything reflecting my demographic really presented on the screen so far today.
I think that's a really interesting challenge, and I suspect that there'll be lots of us going, oh shit, what do we do, and what do we need to do for next year? And I suppose the challenge is also making sure that we can be commissioned or self-funded to do work that makes sure that everybody is stories are told or represented, and we've got enough data. But is there a reflection in the room that somebody would like to share to that point? There is a hand up, so yes, hopefully so.
Thanks. Yeah, no, I just wanted to say I completely agree. And being at this conference last year, it was so it's just so good to be a part of this space with like-minded people doing like-minded research, where we are having these difficult conversations. And last year it felt like the theme was, okay, you know, we're finally talking about the gender critical movement. We're finally sort of including, like you said, the gender rebels. We're including trans people. We're breaking down the LGBTQ plus umbrella more. But yeah, absolutely, to your point, I think it's year on year. This year I've seen a shift already in how we're speaking, and if we keep this kind of progression, it would be great to see next year. Yeah, absolutely, more focus on people as individuals. Just a reflection.
Brilliant. Well, thank you. And I think we are going to go for a break now, but I think it's on all of us when we put the call for contributions and papers out this time next year for people to put ideas forward, because even if you don't know the right people to be giving the papers or presenting the research, we can do some of that work. But it's really great to have these challenges as we put together next year's session. So thank you for a great challenge. Right, thank you very much, Emma and Harry. We are now having a break. I think we've got 15 minutes, and then we've got our panel conversation and then our keynote conversation. Half an hour. Get networking. Right.
Is it too early to wait till to get the mic, or?
Yeah, I'd say come back in 5.
Hello. I hope everybody had a good break. The coffee and tea, as far as I'm aware, is staying out. So if we do finish early, feel free to go and grab another one, or if anybody wants to get up and go and grab one during, then feel free. The panel will be encouraging a lot of questions, so feel free to just raise your hand, shout out at any point, stand up if you want to have a question if we don't see you. But we'll be talking about Pride Employee Network groups, and I'm joined by Lee from Just Eat, Chris from Ipsos, and Rachel from Macquarie.
Yeah, that's right.
Perfect. I was always worried about how to pronounce that one. And the first question, we're just going to have a discussion, but like I said, feel free to shout out, is just how do you find your experience with employee network groups, and what sort of things have you done within your organizations?
Shall I start? Hello, everyone. So I'm Chris. I'm Deputy Head of our Creative Excellence team at Ipsos, and also the reason I'm here is I'm co-chair of our Pride Network. So we have around 1,700 people in the company, and about 150 of those are on our Pride Network. The type of things that we do. Yeah, so the type of things we do, we're a group of people that, or the kind of committee, a group of people who are passionate and volunteer to be part of the employee network. And we work to amplify the voice of LGBTQ people within the organisation, to inspire, to connect people, also to promote allyship. And then something that is maybe maybe not unique to our industry, is we also work with researchers across the business on how to ask some of the questions we've been talking about today, how to interpret some of the data that we see as well. So we offer some kind of, I suppose, professional advice and support as well. So that's a bit about the network and the type of things that we do.
So I'm Rachel. I'm from Macquarie, which is a global financial services firm, so an investment bank. We're Australian headquartered, about 20,000 people worldwide. About 2,500 of those are in EMEA, and most of them are in London, to be frank. Our Pride network was established about 10 years ago, and I was one of the co-founders. The ENG, we call them ENGs, does everything. I mean, it's events, it's raising awareness, it's role modeling, it's about ensuring our policies are consistent, and really trying to ensure that we retain our staff, but also that we recruit the best talent, and ensuring that those in the queer community, the LGBTQI+ community, are welcome and aware. So the ENG is really there to support the business, to promote everything that we do. We applied for the Stonewall Workplace Equality Index in 2016 as a bit of a test, and I found something. We came in 393rd. Brilliant. And that was all driven by the ENG, because we felt we really wanted to benchmark what we were doing or not doing in terms of the business. And last year, 2022, Macquarie came in first in the Stonewall Equality Index. Thank you very much. It's very sweet. So there's a lot that we did in order to get us to that point. It was an incredible amount of hard work, but it really was led by staff. And there's lots of examples I can share maybe later about what we did.
Perfect, thank you. Hello, I'm Lee. I work at JustEatTakeaway.com. I'm in the global brand marketing team, but my side hustle, I guess, is global chair of our LGBTQIA+ network, Jess and Proud, and pretty much similar to what these two do, what our network does. I think one big thing for us, especially for this year, we're all spread out across different teams across the world, really, in so many different offices, and it's hard to really build a community. So a big thing this year for us is to build a community locally, and that's really important for us because it's really important to create that community feel, those people that you want to go to, hang out with like-minded people, but also make sure that people are engaged. And what we did this year is actually restructured our team. We've got a group on the committee of 35 volunteers, which is quite a big number for a committee, and we've got about over 500 people in the network itself. But because we're all spread out, it's really important that we had people on the ground itself. So understanding the policies on the ground, what the feeling is, and actually set up events locally. So rather than just streaming everything, which we're quite used to, it's nice to meet in person. And that's what our ERG, our network, is really focusing on, apart from, as well as everything else that we do events across the year and comms and so on.
That's great, thank you. I wanted to hear about any specific work that you've done or any specific experiences that you've had within your ENGs that have really highlighted the importance of what you were doing. If you have anything, feel free to go first, whoever has.
Go for it, Chris.
Okay. So things that we've done that have highlighted the importance of the network, I think there's a few that spring to mind. So probably around a year and a half, 2 years ago, we ran a session with, it was an online internal panel with people from, let's say, in different stages in their career, or people who are new to research, people who've maybe been around for longer, talking about being out at work and how that has evolved over time. I think that was I found it really interesting being on the panel, but we got a lot of feedback from people across the company talking about how they found that quite inspiring to hear about how things had changed over the years. And then another one that's probably quite a small thing, but during Pride Month this year, we tried to go out to a number of team meetings to talk a bit about the network and why we exist and what we do. And we framed that around, why do we have Pride Month? And we had a big discussion around that, and we kind of thought, well, are we telling everyone what they know? But actually, it was quite interesting that a number of the reason why Pride Month happens, or why some of the stats that are out there about the countries that the number of countries it's illegal to be queer, or the number of people who don't feel they can be out at work. That was quite empowering to see the way that people responded to that across the business. So the things we took for granted sometimes were surprises for others.
I think following that train of thought, one thing we found when we first launched Pride at Macquarie was that senior staff, particularly straight men, were really uncomfortable talking about LGBT topics. They were tripping over themselves, they were getting language wrong, and they just stopped engaging because of that. So we implemented a reverse mentoring program. Great way of building junior talent, great way of role modeling, but it really helped them. And ultimately we wanted allies as well as, the community to feel, part of something. And that reverse mentoring has been going on for years, and people are starting to hear about it and replicate it across other DEI networks as well, because it's just a really easy, simple way of, training people, engaging people, and helping them learn. Another thing that I think follows that as well is, we do a lot of events. I'm sure you guys do a lot of events, but you can get a bit overwhelmed with it all, particularly for Pride Month. So really trying to ensure that the events are spread out and the calendar's done across the year, we found is really, really important, and that people don't just sort of, focus in on Pride Month as being, well, that's the time. And that's when the business will suddenly, turn up and think that these are important topics. So those were, certainly two things that we're trying to push hard at the moment.
Yeah, I think to echo that, I think it's so important, which we try to do, is spread them out. And that's the feedback we've got from internal surveys that we've done as well, is don't concentrate them all in Pride Month. And we know that, and it's we try to avoid that. There's plenty of other days and weeks and months throughout the year that we can ground ourselves in. And it doesn't even need to be on a special occasion or event. We can talk about it any time of the year. And that's something that we really pushed this year as well, especially because we set up our first external Pride campaign this year as JustEatTakeaway.com. We sponsored 8 different Pride parades in cities across 8 markets, and it's something we're really proud to do. But I think our main goal and almost the way that we sold it in is we're happy to do that, but we have to do other events outside the year as well, because it's not just about that month, or actually because we're a global brand, it was across 3 months, luckily. So at least that was 3 months of, we're called it the Summer of Pride. But it's really important that we show up throughout the year. Of course, we can ground ourselves in one particular month, but support is always needed for the community every day. Outside of Pride Month. So yeah, that is really, really important. And similar to what you said about engaging senior members, again, for us, we've seen that's been really, really helpful. And it's all about, being part of the committee is about relationship building internally. And, we need to be heard. So to speak to the right people, we've got, luckily, an ex-co member who's on the board, who sits as a sponsor of our network, who is our Chief Marketing Officer, which is incredible as well, because it allows us and opens up conversations that we can do outside of just internal events, which we have done this year. I'm very proud to have been part of and pushed forward for.
Sorry, just building on some of this as well. I think one thing that is important to think about is we have like 9 different employee network groups within Ipsos, and so one of the things that we've not been particularly good at before, and are trying to do a lot more of, is working with those other groups. We've talked a lot about those themes today. So we are partnering with the Parents Network to think about how can we host an event internally that looks at LGBTQ plus parents, and potentially next year looking at parents who have children who identify as LGBTQ plus. So starting to think outside of our network is something that we need to challenge ourselves on and trying to do more of this year.
And how do you sort of drive that engagement with the wider sort of employee network groups within the company and within the company itself, especially outside of Pride Month, which, as you've highlighted, can be really difficult because that's when most people seem to care. So how do you sort of continue driving that engagement throughout the rest of the year?
I'd say, firstly, like I said before, it's about building relationships.
Yeah.
It's so important. But we're lucky to have people, a department, inclusion, diversity and belonging department, that has been amazing at bringing people together. We have a monthly meeting with all the chairs, which is great. We've got a forum to speak about it with, and it's all about sharing. And I think it's not just about finding nuances, it's actually even just promoting events in our own ERGs to really build that community feel we all work at the same place, and it's really important that we all support each other and support other communities, and that's something that's really, really important, and something that I definitely push for as chair, and I think all the other chairs understand as well. We want great engagement and we want people to feel supported.
I think that intersectionality is becoming such an obvious topic for the whole DEI kind of story that organisations are starting to tell. And I don't know about everybody else, but the Pride networks seem to have almost gone first, and the other ENGs are now sort of catching up. We had a bit of backlash. We had a bigger budget. We had better branding. We had better comms, and the other ENGs, you know, and there's a whole variety of them, were sort of, you know, racing to catch up. There's equality now in terms of the budgets, but it took a while. And actually, I think, you know, Pride at Macquarie took quite a leadership role in sharing how best to do this, but not forgetting that, you know, you're not just one part, that there will be people that intersect throughout. So that's been quite an interesting journey, and it's consistently evolving. We've just launched, we have a fusion network, which is for people from minority and ethnic backgrounds. We just launched a Black community specific in the UK off the back of that. So it's constantly evolving, is what I'm trying to say.
And I think just building on both those points as well, like planning is really key. So our overarching Belong network have a calendar, and there's only so many events across the company that can be promoted, that can be held before people, you know, just don't start to kind of tune in. So trying to plan across the networks and work out where the gaps are, where we can fit in, where we can work together, is really important to make sure we have a good spread of things, and we're not just all in the summer. There's interesting things coming up across the year.
That's great, thank you. And what other challenges have you sort of had while working within the group? I know there's probably a lot.
I think a bit of as we were building up to the index for 2022, there seemed to be a bit of a rush to do lots and lots of things. We all knew what the index looked like, what we needed to do. So I think just making sure that you're being authentic and the events that you are plugging in and activities are, you know, appropriate and relevant. And whilst the index has been brilliant for us, it might not be right for other organisations, but we had a very clear aim. It also took an enormous amount of work, and we had to rely heavily on our HR colleagues to actually do the data points and pull it all together, because this isn't the day job. So that was one of the real challenges. I think personally, I kind of got a bit burnt out's a heavy word, but a bit tired of just doing kind of, particularly during COVID, being on Zoom panels and events and sort of representing. And I was invited to a lesbian visibility day to sit on a panel for the business, and I sort of rolled my eyes when I was asked again to do it, and felt sort of, oh gosh, you know, I could be doing other things. But I did it in the end with a sort of, you know, couldn't really be bothered. Actually, it was a brilliant hour. I was talking to colleagues in Singapore, Australia, London, and had this great hour. We got loads of viewers, loads of people coming in and asking questions. And off the back of it, somebody contacted me to tell me that she was nervous to come out to her boss, but having seen how positive and open and, you know, being able to bring your whole self to work, being at Macquarie was, she was going to come out to him, and she did, and she obviously everything was fine. And then another woman got in touch to say that one of her children is identifying as trans. And did we know other people in the business who were parents? So back to your point about parents and carers, who were parents who had children who were trans that she could connect with, just to sort of do a knowledge share. So all of a sudden, I've been sort of rolling my eyes and couldn't be bothered. And then there were these incredible outcomes that had I not shown up and been available, may not have happened. So I think one of the challenges is, you know, remembering to be a role model yourself, and that, you know, we can never stop or should never stop doing that. Yeah.
I'd say that's definitely a good point. Practically, time zones and process. Time, because we're all volunteers, especially on our committee as well. So it's quite difficult and challenging to find time to do it, especially when you have got a lot to do. You want to do everything, but you can't. So it's about sort of managing that with your day-to-day job, and being chair. It's about encouraging and helping those that don't have the time to do it, but still want to be part of the committee, still want to help, and finding them a role within the committee. Time zones, and just because you said Australia, I thought about it. It's, you know, different time zones that we are in across the world. Sometimes doesn't work out for events, sadly. Obviously we can do the best we can, but one time at Canada it's definitely going to be different from Europe and from Australia, for example. So finding the time and finding the way to make everyone included and still feel part of the community is really difficult when you are spread out so far. And that's why, again, I say about the community feel and having people on the ground themselves, so they can show up, they can be at the event, they can do stuff on the ground, which is great. And then process, we try and you know, we're across multiple departments that we talk to. From marketing, they've got their own process, from HR, from finance, and again the committee are made up of people from the network across all different work streams and have different skills, which is amazing, but actually can be quite difficult when you're trying to have one process and get the job done, whether that be create events, comms, whatever it might be. It's challenging, but it's amazing that we can all learn from each other and all learn different skills, which I guess is a little positive spin there, but it is challenging, getting everyone on the same page. And yeah, luckily the most difficult one is, or because it's so expansive, is marketing. And luckily I sit on within the marketing team, so that helps a bit, but it's almost like a double-edged sword, because yeah, I'm sort of leading both parts of ERG and marketing day job wise. So yeah, that'd be my 3 challenges.
From my side, I think I'd echo a number of those. The other challenge I think that we found is kind of knowing when to shout about what we're doing and how loudly to shout. So some of the events that we've only really communicated to the network about those events. And in hindsight, we probably should have been bolder and gone to the whole company about stuff, but we don't necessarily, like that there's 9 different network groups. If everybody's telling everyone about everything they're doing, there's going to be just a deluge of information. So trying to work out how loud to shout and when, because there's definitely some things we did last year that were really good, and I wish we'd gone a bit bigger on them in hindsight, just in terms of telling people. So that's a big one. And the other, so we're a UK focused network. Ipsos has got Pride networks in 4 markets, so North America, Brazil, UK and France, and actually remembering those other networks are there and trying to connect with them and learn from each other rather than necessarily reinventing the wheel the whole time. I'd say that's another thing we need to get better at.
I think just to add to that as well, of challenge is what to concentrate on. There's, you know, we want to make sure that we represent everyone, really, and sometimes, sadly, you know, even part of the LGBTQI plus community, people get left out, and we don't want that. But that it's quite difficult to make sure that you are including everyone. It's a challenge. we should face up to it. We have to, and find those stories or those issues to represent. But sometimes it can be quite difficult to engage people and to ensure they're speaking up to tell us, what they want to hear. So obviously internal surveys help, but even then, it's sometimes difficult to find those nuances to really pick out.
Thank you. I was wondering, just off the back of a couple of your points, how would you recommend avoiding that sort of feeling of exhaustion and burnout when you're trying to balance both your work-life balance and your sort of day job and this sort of volunteering balance, just to make sure, because you can't provide 100% of yourself to every part of it, but you also don't want to give too little to any one part?
I'd probably say knowing your skills and those of your colleagues on, if you have a steering committee, and being very deliberate and clear about, if you want to have work done, if you have work streams, or we have a community work stream and a comms work stream and events work stream, so that you're very clear about who's doing what, when and how, and that as chairs, I'm not a chair anymore, but as chair, that you delegate and you don't get stuck into all the weeds and the detail across everything, because it's just, it would be impossible, particularly now, I would say. So I would, just know your strengths and stick to your skill set.
And also, it's we're volunteering for this. If things go wrong, they go wrong, and if you can't do everything, sometimes we put our passion, our heart into everything because we are so passionate, and that's why we do it. But sometimes if people aren't behind you, haven't got that support, sometimes it can't be done. Obviously, that's not just giving up on everything, because otherwise we wouldn't do anything. But it's also, like you said, about that roles and responsibilities, like really practically, is having people on the committee you can rely on, having that support in the company that you can rely on as well. So that, when I was planning Pride, it was really difficult because I was doing a marketing job. I was doing being a chair as well. And I think it's really important that you have that support network and you can lean on people from around the business to do their day job as well and help out, which is great when it happens.
Yep, and I think just being flexible as well. I mean, to all those points, everyone on our committee has volunteered to get involved, and the size of the committee then varies during the year. Like I think around the springtime there were about 6 or 7 of us. Now there's about 12. So it varies as people join the business, leave the business, express an interest, have the time. So that impacts how much we can do, how much we can take on, the frequency with which we can publish our newsletter, the way that we might need to adapt our plans, but just entering with the best intentions to deliver on the plan and making sure you can do as much of it as possible.
Hello, sorry, I've got a question. Hi. So yeah. So it's really interesting what you're saying about engaging different members of the LGBTQ+ community. One of the troubles that I have kind of with my colleagues is that if they're an ally, they might not feel that they can go to like an event like this because they're like, oh well, that's not for me. So how do you also feel that you can engage allies in ED&I groups in general, but also events like this?
Plus ones. I can't actually see. Oh, there you are. For events, just really encouraging people to invite their allies, because we always forget. I say we. I always forget. So having a +1 kind of model is a really easy tool just to make sure that people aren't forgetting, and that you're really deliberate in telling them this is an open invite, please, or you can't come unless you bring an ally. Doesn't work quite so well, but yeah, I think just being really, really conscious of it. And I think you're absolutely right. I think often our allies are nervous, or they don't know when to pitch up or not. So it's kind of almost on the community to make sure that they feel as welcome.
Yeah, I think that's completely true. And I would hold our hands up that looking back on this year, we've not done as much around allyship as we wanted to. And in part, we didn't have an ally on the committee, and we do have an ally on the committee now who's going to help, I suppose, keep that front of centre, it is something that we are mindful of, and goes back to my point around sometimes we've not been bold enough talking to the whole company about things, just people who are in the network, and there are several allies who won't feel the need or compelled or just think about joining the network. So we definitely need to be bolder in engaging and make sure we have it front of mind as well.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with those, and it's such an important point. And I think it's about also being present in the right spaces, so that it's no doubt you'll just come to it. Event, for example, we had the Pride sponsorships in key cities this year, and the spaces were reserved for the community, people that were in the community and that engage, but we didn't want to make it just exclusive. We held almost like a pre-celebration in the office, and also there was a number of places that not everyone could go, but so we held a pre-celebration in the office in every single city that we could. So we had, I think it was about 12 cities in the end across the world, that we held an inclusive celebration where everyone could come and did want to come and be part of it. And I think it's definitely important to have people present at educational and inspiring sessions, but we are allowed to celebrate as well, and we definitely are allowed to celebrate with allies. And I think it's about engaging people and getting them to try, and so encouraging them to come to more and more events, which is incredible. And I think it's about that showing up and relationship building, and luckily we have our exec board member who's our sponsor is an ally as well, so that really helps as a senior figure to really show support for the network too.
I'd also add there's so much material out there, particularly at the moment, across all the DEI topics. There's some great, from videos to books, whatever, and sharing those. So anything that your networks are reading, and then sharing those amongst your allies, and that constant drip feeding and reminding of what's available to help them educate themselves. So it's not always the hand holding, because otherwise that just gets really tedious. But I think sharing content is really, that's been really positive for us.
Hello. So I actually have two. Sorry, also not sorry. One, do you think it's fair that these volunteers are doing such labour for free, considering how much work it actually is within a business that, in theory, in an ideal world, would be this inclusive and wonderful anyway? And the second question is, I'm really delighted to hear how you're doing so much work internally, but what I'm really interested in knowing is how much of this are you communicating externally to the wider world, to your customers, the people who are looking at your Instagram feeds? Like, this is all clearly very important to the business, which is why they're allowing you to work so hard for free for them. But I think what's important is that we're going to be seeing, we've already talked about today about how visibility is so vital. Like, how much of that is happening where you are?
Cool.
Do you want to come speak to my manager firstly? I guess, from a volunteer perspective, we it's difficult, isn't it, to strike that balance? And I would love to get paid extra for it, for sure. And I'm sure everyone else would. And it's, but we don't just do it for money. We do it for passion as well. We do it because we want to show up. And that's certainly why I do it. Obviously, everyone has their own reasons why. Otherwise, I certainly wouldn't. But obviously, money does help. But I don't think that should be the driving factor for doing this personally. Obviously, it's a nice to have, for sure.
I think if you speak to many DEI heads of DEI in firms at the moment, I'd like to think, and certainly our person would say, she sees herself as not being in a job in a decade's time, but there's still an awful lot of work to do, and that ultimately the culture of organisations will change, where it'll just be the norm for the queer community to be considered part of every day, as well as the disability community, etc., etc. But we're not there yet, so it is incumbent, I think, on us to show up, be role models, push that change through, and if that means a few extra hours, then
you know, I think all of us would probably agree that that's okay for now, because we are seeing a huge shift change. I mean, even compared to 10 years ago when we started, even the language we're talking about, when we started our Pride network, Stonewall didn't even have the T. You know, the world is shifting quite rapidly across the board, and so I hope I'm right, that maybe in a decade's time we won't be needing conferences like this, and we won't be sitting here, and that would be the dream. But I do think there's an awful lot of work to do and to go. And I've completely forgotten your other question.
I guess I can cover that. Do you want to cover the last question before we move?
Yeah, sure. So I think, yes, it would be lovely to get paid loads of extra money to do this part of the role, but as well as all the benefits or all the things we're thinking about for the wider organization, connecting people, inspiring, amplifying, like I find I get a lot of satisfaction from the role. I get a lot from it. I've connected to other people internally. I like helping shape the culture of the place that I work. So it isn't completely altruistic. I feel that I get a lot from it. It's one of the parts of my work or my time at work that I enjoy the most. So I find it very kind of personally rewarding. On the external point, it's really interesting. So we're just launching a global Pride network, which I'm co-chair of as well, along with one of the co-chairs from France, and they have a very different approach in France. They are much more outward facing with a lot of the stuff that they do. We've tended to be more internal because our focus has been very much about building up from the grassroots and employees creating the network and the culture, rather than overtly going external with it. And we have conversations about that on the panel quite often, and there's quite a heated difference of opinion as to whether it is right to be going out. If we think we are a very good employer, but could we be better? And so there's a number of there's split opinions as to how external we should be on it within our network.
I was going to say it took a while for us, and I think setting up our first Pride global campaign this summer, it took a while to discuss that, and a lot of discussions with many teams. Are we ready? Are we ready to open our doors up and show what we're doing, or should our efforts be more internally first? But actually, we thought that it's progress. We're doing a lot of good things internally, and we can shout about them and inspire other people. And we had our first global campaign called Free to Be, which was in 12 different markets this year, and it was incredible. And we were able to talk about what we do, how we support. We had a lot of different PR events around the world. So we had in Germany, we had a drag costume competition for young designers to design a costume for a German drag queen, and it was incredible because we were really funding local talent, and we gave 10,000 euros money to really support the younger community. We had this, it was incredible runway experience at the end of the finale, and they were all on the Pride Parade, all the drag queens, all the designers, and it was incredible. And we did this in 3 or 4 different markets. In the UK, we partnered with Football versus Homophobia, and had the first allyship training for grassroots football teams, where people could sign up to, and that was sold out pretty quickly. So it's about those local events. I think there's a lot of backup. You need to do it and do it properly. We said that almost our strategy was we can walk the walk, but we need to talk the talk as well. We can't just sponsor parades because they look nice. We need to actually do stuff on the ground and do it not just to tick box, but actually to support the community in different ways that and show up. And yeah, I'm really proud of the work for year 1, and it was smaller, but yeah, it's encouraging that the business was so behind it, and it was led by our network, which is also brilliant. And we were able to show up for the company for the first time, because of course not every company, but a lot of companies, put a pride flag out for Pride Month, but it's more than that. And like I said before, it's not just Pride Month, it's not just Pride Summer, it's every day. And that's it put it on the agenda for us, which was incredible.
I think we take a slightly different position just because we're not a retail bank, we're an investment bank. So our focus externally is really on talent, rather than our clients necessarily. So for us, getting into graduate markets, being on campus, ensuring that people are hearing about what we're doing with our Pride network really helps us build our brand to highlight, to find the best talent. And exactly to your point, we weren't doing that 7 or 8 years ago because we couldn't back it up with excellence internally. So until we got ourselves into a position that we were super comfortable with as doing everything we possibly could for the community, that was the point at which we started to go out much more externally. Coming in number 1 on Stonewall led us to sponsor the LGBT awards for I think it's 3 years. I think we've just done our 2nd year. And that for us is a huge lift. Seeing Macquarie next to Tesco is quite hilarious. But it's one of our first sort of, I suppose, open advertising that we've done. But I think what we've seen from staff, not just within the community, but all our staff, and not just in the UK, but globally, is the pride that they have in us, firstly getting to Stonewall, but then, being able to fund the awards and really supporting and backing something as big as the awards. So it's taken a long time, but it has to be authentic and genuine if you're going to put money behind it.
Opens doors up as well, doesn't it, really?
Yeah.
I think if you start, there's so many different, obviously, Just Eat, and there's restaurant partners that are approaching us saying, we know you're doing that.
Yeah.
How can we get involved in an authentic way? And it's incredible. And we're trying to make a difference and trying to get all our partners on board across the world. So it's step by step. It's slow movements, but it's encouraging that we can start.
Yeah.
What kind of tips do you have for people who might want to start their own employee network groups who might not have Pride specific ones at the moment within their organization?
Get senior sponsorship first. I mean, it's obvious, but if you don't get genuine or senior sponsorship, often it's a lot harder to then draw down funds because you ultimately are going to need a budget to do stuff, and it then flows from there. Obviously, you need a groundswell of people that are passionate in whatever topic or issue, but without that senior sponsorship, I think you're just going to be chasing your tail, which we did for our first year. Going to the pub and having drinks and talking about, the community back then was great, and a great way to network. But we didn't really do anything until we'd really got some senior engagement. So that would be the first thing I'd do.
Yeah, and I would say as well, think about, again, as we've discussed, it can take a lot of time. So think about what things are already out there that you can start to leverage and amplify, rather than you don't necessarily have to set up 10 events in your first year. That is going to be someone's whole-time job. So just think about what's realistic and what you can already tap into that's out there.
I haven't set up a network, but I have helped others, and I think it's also about doing the research. It's having a plan. It's having not being too overambitious, especially in year 1, and definitely senior buy-in for sure, and having the space to do it as well. Hopefully, a lot of more companies now will have the space and want it if they haven't got it already. So it's having a really slick business plan, if we want to get practical like that, to show that it's a serious thing. It's not just a bit of fun, because some people would think, and some businesses, it's a couple of events, put a pride flag up, that's the network, but it's more than that. It's a lot of hard work, and it's having that dedication and time to do it as well.
Hello, sorry, just a quick question over here on the steps of joy. You've been talking a lot about kind of incorporating different markets into the kind of this events planning. I was just wondering how you incorporate cultural differences into that kind of planning, because obviously, Chris, you mentioned about your French market being, you know, thinking differently about being explicit with what you're doing within the business. I was just wondering how that kind of differs for what you kind of guys plan for the events.
So I think I don't really have an answer yet, because we're in early days of starting to connect with the other networks around the globe, and starting to think about where we can work together and where we can lean on each other. What we are, and again, I definitely don't have the answer to this, but what we are thinking about as we start to build a global network is how we navigate the differences in different countries where you can be, where you can and can't be more comfortably out, I suppose. So we need to, and that's one thing we're just going to need to start thinking about and work out how we can create a meaningful global network that is truly a safe space.
I would the approach that we take as a global firm is regionally. So actually our networks are regionally focused, and that does really help because it is so nuanced in so many different markets. We experience with our French colleagues this whole idea of bringing whole self to work isn't necessarily what they necessarily want, and I can see somebody shaking their head. It's just a very different culture of how you show up at work, what's culturally comfortable for people. So really understanding those differences, even with our region, within our region, has been a real journey and continues to be a real journey for us. Not assuming is really important, something I've learned, and asking those questions. But having that regionalisation, I think, really helps ensure that there is the devil's in the detail, and that we really understand what's going on locally. That said, the example I gave about the panel I was on with a colleague from Singapore, where everybody was saying, oh goodness, you've got a Pride network in your Singapore office, how does that play out? Well, actually, there's an awful lot going on in Singapore with the LGBT community, and educating government and other key stakeholders, and having a brand like ours aligned to that and being comfortable in that space is actually a very positive thing for the clients and for our staff as well. So it is really nuanced and takes a lot of time, but that's why I think also our DEI colleagues are there to navigate us, because we are just volunteers ultimately, and so we speak to that. I do find that there are things that happen in sort of Australia that Wear It Purple Day. Suddenly the whole firm has to wear purple. I mean, we'd never heard of it, and we're sort of being asked to wear purple, and nobody quite knows why. So there's lots of different activities that happen that we've.
I'm down for purple.
Yeah, I mean, me too.
Right.
I think as well, it just especially at Just Eat, takeaway.com, we live by our values across the board. So no matter where you are, where you're from, it's inclusive of everyone. And it's nice enough to say that, but it is true. And, someone asked a question when we did show our whole company what we're doing for Pride is, why are we doing it? Like, it's, what's the point of this? And what if it's against someone's religion or culture or something? And we work at a business. You can have your own beliefs, of course. And that's what makes us all different, and that's great and diverse. But we work at a business at Just Eat Takeaway.com that has a set of values that we all are part of, and I think it's really important to remember that we're not doing anything extreme. We're showing things of inclusion and acceptance, and that's what we're trying to do. And I think it's really important to do that. Yes, of course, every country we have nuances, and I think that's great. And sometimes sad as well if we can't show up. But like I said, for our global campaign, even just to have a few pride flags and some decoration and sort of showing up. We did that in Poland, which is not, people probably can't bring themselves out to work, which is fine, but outside of work probably can't show up as we can freely here. And I think that was so important. We didn't go big there. We started small, and it's about seeding it in and encouraging it and just showing that we are there as a network for support for every single colleague from the community and allies. So I think that's great to be able to do that, and for the company to back that as well.
Thanks.
I have another question.
Hi everyone. So I used to run RDI task force group NRG at a previous company, and something that we always struggled with was changing budgets and fluctuating budgets and having to work around them. Do you have any tips and tricks? We did a whole series of events that were free because we had all of our budget taken away. Yeah, just be interested to know if you've had any experience with that, or if you've always found it quite easy to sort of grasp that budget.
So so I've been co-chair since March, so I'm about to enter into my first budget discussions. So we'll see how that goes. But what I can say is we've our past CEO and our current CEO are very, very supportive of Belong and of all the networks. And then in terms of spend, we the type of stuff we do through the year, some of it has budget associated to it, some of it doesn't. It is a real mixture of things that, you know, internal panels that we'll do, or events that people will set up and run off their own back, like, you know, quiz nights and various things like that, to guest speakers that we will make charitable donations to, make charitable donations on their behalf. So we have a mix of things that we do. Some cost, some don't.
I'd agree. Just being able to double up, collaborate where you can. We have Interbank, so we can actually do other network events with other firms. But I suppose the big ask on budget is the business case and making sure you've got the real data points, the evidence to back up the why. If people are not seeing kind of what the point is, there's a really awful statistic of something. I think it's something like 65% of graduates go back in the closet when they join investment banking. You know, for us, it's a bit of a no-brainer statistic to say there's a real importance that we continue to have an LGBT network. And I'm sure there's plenty of other data points that we can articulate for the other ENGs. But yeah, just having that evidence is critical.
Yeah, there was a lot of stealable facts and figures earlier, actually, which is, you know, this is why these meetings are and these conferences are really important for us to get inspiration and bring it back to the business. But I think it's also starting about the beginning of your year with planning is your objectives. Those objectives are signed off by the company, certainly at us for inclusion diversity. And to meet those objectives, sometimes you need budget for that, and you need to beg, borrow and steal from different departments, and collaboration is definitely important. It's not all about budget. There are some events that you can do for free and do really well. And I even say and encourage, you know, it can just be an event where a group of people have lunch together. It's as simple as that, really. You don't need to have an all singing, all dancing budget and tens of thousands to be able to create a community, create an event, and really feel like you're belonging to something. Even if one person shows up, I always say to the committee, it doesn't matter, because at least they know we're here, at least they know we exist, and people can come to these forums, these events, whenever they choose. So yeah, budget is very important to do great stuff and get great speakers, but it's not always about that.
Thank you. I think, is that all the time that we have for now? If anybody has any more questions, please do find any of us afterwards.